There's only one place you can hear Jonathan Mosen, and that's right here, the home of the fun guys. This is Mushroom FM.
We are about to head into another 3 hours of Mosen at Large here on Mushroom FM. Looking forward to your company and your comments. The old adage, there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about, seems to be very true, because Steve Cutway's got the early years at 5 p.m. Eastern, in which he promises an interesting thing. The One Hit Wonder show's on at 7, and then we've got the Snowman with Snow White FM live at 8.
Mushroom FM.
Music, personality, and fun times on MushroomFM.com.
How do I act? What do I do? What do I say?
Mushroom FM.
I'm Jonathan Mosen. This is Mosen at Large, the show that's got the blind community talking. As Microsoft says little about Windows 11 accessibility, we'll talk about what we do know regarding Windows 11 in general and hear your thoughts. Has blindness advocacy lost its mojo and childhood radio memories?
Mosen at Large Podcast.
If you would like to be in touch with the show, you can drop me an email to Jonathan, that's Jonathan, at mushroomfm.com. That email could contain an audio attachment, or you could just write it down like we used to in the olden days when life was simpler. You could also tweet with the Mushroom FM hashtag if you'd like to have a discussion while the show is taking place and draw that to our attention. So just write the number sign and Mushroom FM anywhere in your tweet. You can also call the listener line, and that number is 864-60-MOSEN. That number is in the United States, 864-606-6736. And if you are on Facebook or YouTube, then you are welcome to leave a comment there in the comments box, and I will do my best to check that as well. Whew, it's all going on. Now, yesterday, we held a discussion about Windows 11 in Clubhouse, and that's what we're going to begin with for those who don't listen on the podcast, for those who couldn't make it to Clubhouse. Subsequently, and in fact before that, we've had some other listener comments about Windows 11, and so we'll go with those as well. So as you can appreciate, when the operating system that powers the majority of the world's computers comes up with a big update, it is going to be a pretty big talking point on a show like this. So let's run with excerpts from this Clubhouse discussion from yesterday. First of all, this is a bit different because with Apple events, we tend to do recaps right afterwards. But in this case, I delayed this recap by a full day after the launch of Windows 11 so we could discuss accessibility announcements relating to Windows 11. The trouble is, nothing has been announced. Not a thing. If all you follow are Microsoft's accessibility channels, you wouldn't even know that Windows 11 has been announced. Microsoft's accessibility Twitter account didn't even promote the fact that a launch of the next version of Windows was imminent. And since that launch, they haven't mentioned it in a single tweet, and there is nothing on the Microsoft accessibility pages about Windows 11. Microsoft has been working hard in recent years to change its public image of being aloof and uncaring. They have tried to engage with end users via various digital channels. But the way they have ghosted the inquiries of disabled people who simply, and in my view perfectly reasonably, want to know if anything will be changing from an accessibility point of view in Windows 11 is nothing short of disgraceful. The launch of a major operating system that powers the vast majority of the world's computers will have been meticulously planned for months, and naturally, it's of considerable interest to a lot of people. So what's gone wrong to the extent that well over 24 hours after that launch, Microsoft hasn't said a thing about Narrator, about whether they've been working with third-party screen reader vendors at this point, about what the new user interface will be like from a screen reader user's perspective, and many other accessibility matters for people with other impairments. Many of us have wished that Apple would say more in their keynotes about accessibility, but to Apple's credit, at least they have web pages ready to go live soon after the event, which talk about accessibility features. This debacle has left me wondering how much Microsoft really has changed, and how much we truly do matter. almost everyone who has responded to my tweets on this issue have strongly agreed that the radio silence from Microsoft is both puzzling and unacceptable. One person, and yes, there always is one, of course, came out with the old "we just have to be patient" mantra. I say this about that. The 24th of June US time was Windows 11 announcement day. They didn't say at any time that there was a different Windows 11 announcement day for disabled people. Patience be damned. If they announced the operating system for everyone else, that was the day we have the right to expect an announcement for us as well. Disabled people should not, and I hope will not, accept being shunted to the back of the virtual bus. Those days are long behind us. Microsoft has dropped the ball big time on this. They've got to make it right, and I believe that we are owed an apology. So let's talk now about what we do know, even if it's nothing about accessibility, regarding Windows 11, and I will introduce our panel. First of all, from sunny Canada, we have Terry Bray. Welcome, Terry. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. As you said, my name is Terry Bray. I am in Canada, and my daytime job is at a major financial institution where I'm a senior technology specialist. Don't ask me what that means because I haven't figured it out. Maybe it's a good thing I'm retiring in the fall. Maybe I'll know by then what I actually do.
But you play a lot with Windows, and you are on the Insider program, correct?
I am on the Insider program, and there was nothing in the Insider program about accessibility either. And as we pointed out before we started, Jonathan, there was a graphic on their page that said what the system requirements was, but it wasn't even accessible. So yes, I do play with Windows, and my daytime job, of course, is all in Windows.
That is very strange that given Microsoft's recent history that they would produce an inaccessible graphic like that. It's also probably timely to mention that while there was a captioned version of the presentation yesterday, it was not audio described. Now, to be fair, I have raised that, and Microsoft's head of accessibility, Jenny Leigh-Fleury, has apologized and said that they will make that right and that they should have done it live and that they will come up with an audio described version as soon as possible. So I'm grateful to Jenny for acknowledging that. But something very strange is going on with this whole release of Windows 11 from an accessibility context, but we'll come back to more of that. And Matt Campbell is our other panelist. And what would you like to tell us about yourself, Matt, other than we're not looking at Linux today?
Right. So, and in fact, Windows has been my primary platform for quite a while now. I have been an assistive technology developer in one way or another for about 20 years. Some of you may remember that I developed the System Access screen reader for Ceratec. More recently, I was a developer on the Windows accessibility team at Microsoft for almost 3.5 years. Now, to be clear, I won't be divulging anything internal here today, but I just wanted to get that out there in the interest of full disclosure. And as I said, Windows is my primary platform, so I continue to follow it with interest.
Right, and I'm grateful for you being here, and I'm going to respect your position. I have heard all sorts of really interesting rumors about what may or may not be coming up in the Rater, and I'm not going to discuss those, not because I'm not prepared to discuss them, but because I don't want to put anybody in an invidious position with this. So I was hoping that we'd have things to talk about, and in that regard, we have nothing to talk about. But we have lots of other things to talk about. So let's go to it. While I have you there, Matt, tell me about your overall impressions. We will drill way down and we'll talk about individual things. But what's your overall feeling about this announcement? Were you overwhelmed, underwhelmed, sort of ambivalent? What did you think?
From what I heard and reading between the lines, my feeling is that in terms of magnitude of impact for screen reader users, I would guess that Windows 11 is going to be somewhere between Windows Vista and Windows 10. The start menu obviously is a big deal. It looks like they have rewritten it again. It sounds like they've made some changes to the taskbar, which has been pretty stable in terms of its implementation all the way back to Windows 95. but they're changing it now. Going again all the way back to 95, you've been able to move the taskbar so it can be docked to the top or the sides of the screen. And that capability, however rarely used, is gone. So that tells me that they've made some deeper changes this time around. For me, the most interesting feature they announced in Windows 11 was support for running Android apps. Naturally, we'll have to wait and see how accessible that is.
And we'll talk about all these things. So
Yes.
your overall impression is you're kind of not ambivalent. You're excited about what's coming to some small degree, right?
Well, I think anxious or apprehensive would be more like it.
Yeah, well, speculation fills a vacuum, right? And this is one of the problems we have. We'll come back and have a look at all these things that you started to discuss in more detail. Terry,
Yes.
You've got the decision to make, don't you, that with no announcements at this stage on accessibility whatsoever, you're on the insider track. So how does that leave you? How are you feeling about Windows 11?
I'm somewhat ambivalent in a way. I understand the logic in moving to a new operating system in that you need at some point to probably drop off a lot of legacy, let's call it trash, and I don't mean people's computers are trash. I mean that there's a lot of stuff in Windows that's been there. Probably there's still code in there from Windows 95, although I wouldn't know about that. But I'm somewhat ambivalent, and partly because it's the first real announcement from Microsoft about Windows in 6 years, and because it's not actually coming to the market, I don't think I saw somewhere about the fall. Is everything that we heard or everything that we failed to hear, as you rightly point out, Jonathan, actually the way what will come out to the public actually be?
And there is going to be a point where you will see both operating systems being updated. They have promised Windows 10 will be supported till 2025. And this November or so, you will have the choice to upgrade to Windows 10 21H2 if you want to, or you can, computer permitting, upgrade to 11. And we will talk about system requirements in a second. Windows 11 updates are going to be annual, and I'm sure that some people who have little glitches when they sometimes get a Windows update will be glad of this. So they're moving away from 6 monthly updates. Let's talk about system requirements. So on the surface, they appear sort of modest, but actually there are some fishhooks there. Who'd like to have a first cut at discussing the implications of what's required to run this new operating system?
The first one is probably not only the confusion, but the problems that will be created by using the onboard chip for Safe Boot. Is that what it's called? I can't remember.
Secure boot.
Secure Boot. Now, my system happens to have it, and it happens to be enabled, and it happens to be working. But there are a lot of systems out there where it's there, but it may not be enabled. And it would be a problem for people who can't see to turn it on because this is a BIOS level thing. The problem I see, Jonathan, is this. Technology in the chip market has moved on. And there are a lot of features on board chips today that are simply not being used by Microsoft. And unlike Apple, who designs their own chips, they're kind of at the beck and call of the chip makers like Intel and AMD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm concerned about the problems that people will have with this. On the other hand, there may be ways that Microsoft knows of that I don't, that they can enable it for you if it's built in and it turn on. If you look at the actual system requirements, they are very modest. They're not expecting a 36 core processor. They don't want you to have 128 gigs of RAM. Although they did double the disk capacity, you need 64 gigs of gigabytes of memory storage. Pardon me for the operating system, but really, if the barriers can be passed that do exist, I don't think as many people will necessarily be left out in the cold as they think will be.
Coming to a theatre near you, Alvin and the Chip Market. Oh, yeah, good movie, Alvin and the Chip Market. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Terry, you might be surprised to learn that my PC does not meet the requirements according to Microsoft's PC health check tool. It's about 5 years old. It's an Asus ZenBook Pro with a quad-core processor, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gig SSD. As you can hear, it's pretty healthy specs. It does have the secure boot capability, and I went into the BIOS yesterday and turned that back on. I can do that because I'm low vision. And it has the Trusted Platform Module, TPM version 2.0.
Right.
And yet, when I ran the PC health check tool, it said that my PC didn't meet the requirements. It wouldn't tell me which requirements it didn't meet.
I think I've read somewhere that you might need an 8th generation processor. Is that correct?
I did some reading about that yesterday, and there's a difference between the hard minimum requirements and what they called the soft floor.
Right.
And the 8th generation processor was apparently the soft floor. And one commenter in the thread I was reading said that those requirements are for manufacturers designing new systems.
I did read just a couple of hours ago, and for those listening on the podcast, we are producing this on Friday night US time. And I read a couple of hours ago that Microsoft has just issued another version of their help tool. If you're wondering if your computer can run it, you can download a health or help tool or whatever they're calling it. You can run this. And it's sort of
PC health check.
Yes, all right, very good. And it tells you very helpfully whether your PC can or cannot run Windows. But what it doesn't really do a good job of telling you is
accessible.
why. Yeah, yes, it is accessible. The point that you point out, I think both of you pointed out, is a really good one, that at least with Apple, if you need to go into this really deep system level, you can. I'm not aware of an accessible way for a screen reader user to get into the BIOS. So it's a real concern in that regard that you might need sighted assistance. And it would even be hard for a service like Ira to help you with this. You'd have to point your camera at the screen and navigate the menus. And I'm not sure I'd be brave enough to do that, because if you got a setting wrong, you could really be in trouble. So this is a domain that really hasn't been conquered yet in the PC world.
And with the chipsets that are out today, one would think that it wouldn't be too difficult to build speech into the BIOS. At least I not being a developer, I wouldn't know. I was reading
motherboard specs yesterday because I did some PC window shopping, and I was reading specs for a particular motherboard, and it mentioned that it had 256 megabytes of ROM for the firmware. One certainly could fit a screen reader and a decent software synthesizer in there.
That's an interesting thought. But that would be something that the BIOS manufacturer presumably would have to do, correct? Or would that be a motherboard manufacturer choice to make?
Probably the BIOS vendor, yes. Now, one possibility is Microsoft has made their own firmware for the Surface open source. So that might be a project for me to take on someday.
I think a few years ago, Jonathan, that Intel actually had a utility, and I haven't looked for it, so I didn't want to tinker around with it, but seems to me that Intel did at one time have a utility that you could actually run when you were in a booted system to read the BIOS.
It would be wonderful if we could take that challenge on for sure, because a lot of people are going in. So my system, I'm pretty confident, will run it. My Dell XPS 15 just comes up positive right away, which is great because it's a grunty machine. My PC in the studio, I'm confident will run it because I only replaced the motherboard about 9 months ago. But I haven't enabled secure boot and I haven't enabled TPM, so I need sighted assistance to do that. I have been reading, and you may be able to comment on this, Matt, that there can be some potential downsides of enabling secure boot relating to driver support. Have you seen this? Have you seen this around?
I have not had to run an unsigned driver for years. So
that's
no,
the ramification.
I haven't run across that. Yeah. I actually wasn't aware that modern versions of Windows would even load drivers that weren't digitally signed by the manufacturer and by Microsoft, unless of course you were in some kind of developer mode.
So can we talk then about the new start menu, another new start menu? And I guess it's difficult for us to really comment on what this might behave like from an accessibility point of view, because what's really happened in recent versions of Windows is, from a screen reader user's perspective, they've tried to make the user experience quite similar from version to version, even though visually there have been quite significant differences.
I think it's safe to say that this time the screen reader experience will be quite different, because from what I can tell from the screenshots that I looked at, it looks like it's a completely different layout.
People have made an analogy to the dock in Mac. Visually, is that what you perceive as well?
The taskbar is a little bit like the dock in that the icons are centered. I think a better analogy for the new start menu would be the launchpad on Mac OS.
Okay. The question I have, and I'm sure a lot of blind people will have, is will there still be that little edit field where you can just type the name of the application you want to launch or the part of settings you want to go to?
Are you talking about the search box in the start menu? Or
yes.
Okay, I'm sure there will. I was wondering if you were talking about the good old Windows R.
Well, I mean, Windows R's got to stay, right? I mean, they're not going to take Windows R away.
Well, you never know.
Never say never.
I wouldn't bet the farm on it.
I will be very disappointed if Windows R is gone. But then I'll just pop open a command prompt and get where I need to go anyway.
Well, how are you going to do it? Windows R?
I've got my command prompt pinned to the taskbar, so Windows 3 for me.
Very good. I have a whole bunch of broadcasting applications because when I'm doing Mosen at large and that kind of thing, my taskbar is full of those. Speaking of that, they did talk a bit about some changes to desktops, and I think that the ability to create multiple desktops in Windows is one of its biggest undersold features. I love that. And one of the things that I wish they would add is the ability to save desktops. So when it's time, for example, for me to broadcast, I can just load that desktop and all my apps come back and there they go. But I didn't hear reference to that yesterday, so I'm hoping that might have made it into 11.
Unfortunately, that was during one of those times when the stream cut out, for me at least.
Mine cut almost at the beginning, and I had to go to ZDNet to read what was going on.
I was trying to ration because I was a bit hard on with justification in my view, on Microsoft at the beginning, so I dropped that from my comments. But yeah, I got up at 3 a.m. and tuned in, and I got 15 seconds of welcome to our Windows, and my heart was racing, and I'm thinking, oh, finally we're going to hear, and then it just cut out. And I finally found a non-sanctioned stream on YouTube, although apparently the Twitter one did hold up. But Microsoft chose not to put it on their Windows YouTube channel, so a lot of people experienced this problem yesterday. But there are some changes to the desktops, but I didn't hear that you would be able to save them, and that'd be a terrific feature if that happens.
Yes, I'm not clear on what is actually different with multiple desktops this time.
It sounded like it was relating to wallpapers and quite visual aesthetic things from what I was able to gather.
Okay.
Windows updates. We'll talk about those briefly. They are going to be 40% smaller and more likely to happen in the background. So hopefully you should see fewer annoying restarts of Windows. I actually had to check out of a hotel one morning and there was a very long line and I had a meeting to go to. When I finally made it to the front of the line, I had to wait 5 minutes because the Windows computer that runs the checkout system had spontaneously decided to restart and install an update. So that would be great if they can manage that. Can we talk next about Teams integration? And this is going to be on the taskbar. The way I understand this working is there's going to be a chat app. It's going to be based on the consumer version of Teams. You will be able to invite people to talk with you, collaborate with you in any platform because Teams for iOS and Android are well set up. I also read that you will be able to send SMS messages. And because they're SMS, they will apply to both iPhone and Android. So you'll be able to text from that app. What I wasn't clear about, whether that was just the invitation that you were texting, or whether they're going to try and go for that same market that the iMessage app has on the Mac, where you can actually send and receive text messages and text with people on your computer. My question for you guys is, do you think Skype is not long for this world? Because I would predict that Skype's deprecation will be announced within the next couple of years or so.
There is a hint that they're moving in that direction. I found a Microsoft web page which lists things that have been dropped in Windows 11. And that was where I found the bit about not being able to move the taskbar that I mentioned earlier. But another thing they listed on there is that Skype will no longer be included in new installs of the OS.
What do you think, Terry? Are we going to see Skype going bye-bye in the next little while?
Well, I use Teams at work all the time, and I have Teams installed on this machine I'm talking on. Goodbye and good riddance if it is.
Yeah? You happy with Teams?
Happy? I don't know about happy, but I find that Teams in many ways is considerably more accessible. You can interact with the chat windows. It's not a Zoom product, of course, but I don't want to get into comparisons because I don't actually like Zoom very much, but and that's just a personal thing. But because I do all my meetings, my phone is Teams, my chat is Teams, my calendar is Teams. So I'm pretty embedded in Teams, Jonathan, to be honest. And so I have Skype. The only thing that bugs me is I can't import my Skype contacts into Teams, or at least I haven't found a way to do it.
Oh, I bet that'll be coming. Terry, I agree with you that I will not miss Skype if it does go away. And really, the only thing that modern Skype shares with classic pre-Microsoft Skype is the name. Skype, by now, has been completely rewritten. The classic Windows Skype app that we all know and probably had a love-hate relationship with is no more. And in fact, modern Skype, from what I know, and this is from what I was able to determine even as an outsider, modern Skype is already based on pretty much the same technology stack as Teams. So if they're going to go ahead and phase out the old brand, then that's fine.
And they've already killed the corporate version, Jonathan.
Yes, I saw
had
that.
to yank.
We went through that transition. When I joined Microsoft, we were using Skype for Business, at least on my team. And we went through the transition from that to Teams.
Yes, I started with my new job, my current job, a couple of years ago, and we were retiring Skype for Business at that time. I do like Teams. I think the audio quality on Teams is very good, actually. But it does bring up for me the fact that there's a hodgepodge of user interfaces in Microsoft land at the moment. And I talked about this on last week's show.
Yep.
I just wish, when you go to a Mac application, for example, you know that you've got a menu bar at the top. You know how to get there. You generally know what the keystroke is to get into the preferences. There's an element of consistency about it. You go into Teams, there's no menu bar at all. If you're using it day in and day out, like you and I are, Terry, it becomes muscle memory. And you know that when you want to send a chat, you're going to press your Control 2 and that sort of thing. But what's actually that intuitive about Control 2? And it's a very busy screen. So I do wish we could have some sort of ability to skin these apps, give us a nice menu bar back. And that goes for Office as well. I may sound like a Luddite and everything, but I never thought that the ribbon was particularly an attractive user interface.
Me neither. And believe me, there's plenty of consternation among developers as well about just the plethora of options that Microsoft provides for third-party developers wanting to implement a user interface for Windows, and the fact that there isn't really a one right way to do it as there is with, say, Apple.
Yeah. I mean, I've been using Windows for, not too far short of 30 years when I was much heavier and younger. And I'm very fortunate because I've been able to see these changes roll out incrementally. But if you are an assistive technology trainer right now and you are starting somebody out on their Windows journey, I just really feel for those people because there's no consistency about the user experience from app to app.
Yeah, I can imagine having to train people on old school native apps versus websites versus apps that are really websites in a native wrapper, and just the different conventions that all of those have.
I'm very glad I don't do any training anymore, to be honest. It's getting to be almost too much to remember yourself to run programs, let alone teach somebody.
Widgets are finally coming to Windows. This is really the last major platform to jump on the Windows bandwagon, and they will display things like your calendar, latest news, sports scores, the usual things that you would find in widgets. We're now used to them if we're iPhone users. Android have had them for a very long time. And developers will be able to make these widgets as well. So it's not confined to Microsoft, which was one suggestion at one point that maybe we'd only see Microsoft being able to produce them. Does this excite people?
You know, this is the first that I had heard that third-party developers will be able to make widgets. As you might expect, I listened to the session about Windows 11 for developers yesterday afternoon, and I did not hear anything about widgets. They talked about the new store. They talked about new features for web developers. They talked about what they're doing for native apps, and they talked about games, but they did not talk about widgets. So I am curious to know how those are implemented. I hope that they're implemented as embedded web pages, because that will probably be the most easily navigable option for a screen reader user.
How would you navigate them? Where would they appear in your workflow?
That's a good question, because would they appear in your Alt tab, or would there be yet another non-mnemonic Windows plus something hotkey for moving your focus there?
That'll be critical in terms of efficiency, because I certainly would be disinclined to use widget if I have to Alt tab through them.
As with all of this, we'll just have to wait and find out.
We will. We're depending on you to install that Windows Insider build, Terry, and be the guinea pig for us all.
I'm
Because my
thinking that
PC
maybe
can't run it.
I'm thinking that maybe I want to drop down a channel or two in that program right now.
I'm not going to do it. I just beat it out right now, but I'm looking forward to what people experience.
I might have to see if I can grab an ISO and maybe force it to run in a VM.
Yeah, VM should be all right, I think. Virtual machines, for those who aren't familiar with that acronym. I've heard
folks.
that a lot of virtual machines you can emulate all the things that Microsoft are wanting. Let's talk about the new touch experience for Windows without a keyboard. I don't know what implications this might have for screen readers, but I never could get on with touch in any Windows screen reader, and I can't really explain why that is. It's possible that it's just because there's more real estate to contend with, or the gestures just conflicted too much with what became muscle memory on my phone. But I'd be interested whether both of you have got on with touch, whether if you have a touch device, you actually use it a lot in tablet mode.
My laptop has a touch screen, but I never use it. Now, when I was on the Windows accessibility team at Microsoft, from time to time I was assigned to test narrator with touch, and honestly, I always just found it to be clunky.
I have it because I actually have the same laptop as you do. And
you got the
I
Dell?
have it. Yeah, the XPS 15.
Yeah.
When I touch it, it's most often inadvertently. It's not on purpose.
But why is that? Is it because you guys are both major keyboard ninjas, and so what you want to do, you just intuitively do? Or is there something wrong with the accessibility of touch?
I'm a keyboard person. That's, I think, the problem. And it's actually part of the problem I have with my iPhone. I wish there was better keyboard support. At the end of the day, I actually prefer that than touch.
Again, drawing on my experience when I was at Microsoft, because I believe I've only ever used touch with a Windows screen reader when I was assigned to do so. Some of the gestures were like iOS, but some of them were different. Now, the fact that different OSs have different gestures isn't a problem in itself, of course, but I just found that the movement between different parts of the system, say, going into the action center or navigating the start screen when it was in that full screen tablet mode, it just wasn't as smooth as it is on an iPhone or even on Android. And honestly, I've long since forgotten the specific bugs that I reported, but it just wasn't a satisfying experience. I'm a keyboard ninja as well, but even if I were just going to treat it as if it was a phone or a tablet, I would still rather go with iOS or even Android.
Voice typing is also coming to Windows 11. I mean, you've had this dictation option in various applications for a while. They say that it is significantly enhanced, and it sounds a bit like Dragon or the voice control features that you have on mobile operating systems. You'll be able to delete text. I think it may also be possible to launch applications. So a significant expansion of the capabilities there. And they made the point in their presentation that it will punctuate for you. So I'll be interested to see how well that works, because I found with Dragon that sometimes I would pause to think and it would interpret that as a new sentence. But voice typing will be... That is, I guess, one accessibility feature that we know about.
They just bought Nuance, Microsoft did. So is the new product at some point really going to be Dragon?
Very good point. So, yeah, that might be a competitive advantage for them. And, I mean, can we please have eloquence and even the vocalizer voices, but especially eloquence built into Windows? That'd be so sweet.
Now, the question that comes to my mind is, how smoothly will voice typing interact with narrator and other third-party screen readers? So, first of all, will the screen reader echo back the system's interpretation of whatever you just dictated, and will it provide feedback when you issue commands like delete that? And the other question, of course, is if you're using a speaker rather than headphones, will the speech recognition hear your screen reader? Or do they have echo cancellation hooked up there? I don't know the answers to those things.
Sometimes Apple does a terrific job of echo cancellations and other times not so much. So with voice control, one of our listeners made the comment that they don't use headphones and that when they use voice control with their iPhone, they hear VoiceOver speaking back, and voice control then goes ahead and interprets that, and it gets this wonderful loop going on. So that would be great if Microsoft can sort that out, because there are real efficiency gains to be had. Speech recognition is getting better, and especially if they've got the Nuance technology on board, where you can even go through a training process where it's on your local system, it's trained specifically to your voice, you can add vocabulary. I mean, that would be a massive boost for Windows 11. Let us talk about the Microsoft Store. And Matt, it sounds like you may know quite a bit about this Microsoft Store. They have redesigned it considerably, and they really want you to get stuff from the Microsoft Store, but they also want developers to feel freer to use the store. So what struck me is that there will be all sorts of applications that can now be put into the store.
Yes, what I heard yesterday during the developer session is that developers will be able to put basically any kind of app that can run on Windows on the store, whether it's a universal Windows platform UWP app, which is the kind that you've always had on the Microsoft Store, or whether it's a desktop app that has been converted to modern Windows app packaging, and I won't go into technical details there, or whether it's a desktop app that's still packaged as a good old .exe or .msi installer. They're also going to allow progressive web apps to be published on the store. The other notable thing they announced is that developers do not need to go through Microsoft's payment processing system. So developers can choose to use their own payment processing system and keep all of the money, except apparently for games.
Do you think then that this could mean we might see JAWS scripts and NVDA add-ons appear in that store, and that there might be a category for them in some way?
I'm not sure. Even with old style installers being posted on the store, I'm not sure how much freedom those installers are going to have to put things in odd locations. That's a good question that I hadn't thought about. I don't know enough yet about the details of how these classic applications are posted on the store, because apparently you have to sign up and be added to a waiting list to get access to those details at this point.
Could be interesting, because what about if you could download JAWS itself or NVDA itself from the store?
I rather suspect that JAWS is too invasive in the system for that to be allowed, but NVDA, quite possibly.
I wonder, though, Jonathan, if since we have no information on accessibility, I wonder if there's going to be any effort to make sure that all these hundreds of thousands of apps they hope will appear, if any of them will even be accessible.
Well, they're going to be reviewed for security and family safety. We should push for them to be reviewed for accessibility as well.
UWP apps haven't done that well with accessibility, really, have they?
No.
Which is kind of disappointing, because, I mean, the whole point of UWP was to be a clean start in terms of development and a modern user interface framework and all of that. And we as accessibility advocates have had the hypothesis for a while that if you give developers a rich enough user interface framework that has accessibility baked into it by default, and a large enough set of predefined standard controls, that accessibility will just happen by default. And obviously UWP is kind of disproof of that hypothesis.
What's gone wrong? Why didn't that happen? Why didn't that vision become reality?
I don't actually know. I need to think about that, but
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on that right now.
Yeah, it's intriguing. Now, this is the one that I'm very, very interested in, and I think it's the most single commented upon thing in the blind community anyway at the moment, and that is that Android apps are coming to Windows 11 through a partnership with the Amazon store. I've been talking to people who know their stuff about this, and the most plausible thing I have heard is that maybe not immediately, but not too soon down the track, Microsoft will introduce some sort of UI automation bridge to allow you to run the Android apps that way with your screen reader of choice. And I wondered what you thought of that idea, Matt.
I hope they do it that way. I do think that's feasible. I wish that they had done it that way for Linux GUI apps through the Windows subsystem for Linux. But unfortunately, for those apps, you have to run a Linux screen reader, meaning basically Orca, on the Linux side, and then, of course, deal with the complications that come from having two screen readers running. So I hope they do better for Android.
It's unlikely that TalkBack would just run on Windows 11, right?
That depends on how exactly the Android compatibility layer works. What I heard during the developer session yesterday is that this Android compatibility layer is based on the same virtual machine technology that they're using in Windows subsystem for Linux. My understanding is they are actually running a version of the Android operating system in a virtual machine, but they've got some kind of customization going on so that the Android application can be displayed in a window as if it was just another application on your system. So it's not like what you would get in something like VMware, where the Android operating system is kind of running in a box, in a window, the single window for the whole operating system. So whether TalkBack would run in that environment, I guess, depends on how heavily they've had to customize the version of Android that they're using.
Are you jazzed about this, Terry?
Well, I wouldn't mind running VoiceStream Reader on my computer and having it sync with my phone, Jonathan.
Yeah, this is what excites me, because there are so many things I would like to do in Windows that I haven't found a good, accessible way of doing. My RSS reader is brilliant on iPhone, and I haven't found anything that will sync to the same cloud service in Windows that's accessible and keep all my feeds in sync across devices. Really, there's no particularly good podcast choices in Windows, and on and on. So if you could hook into Android and then pick a cross-platform solution, then that might be very interesting from a consumer point of view anyway.
I'll be interested in seeing how this works from a technical point of view, and in particular, how they handle accessibility. But I honestly can't think of any applications where I have a burning desire to run an Android app on my PC.
See, for me, I can think of a number of solutions. The other interesting thing about this is that Chromebooks do this too. I've been working on a series that's coming to a Mosen at large near you on Chromebooks. And I think that Chromebooks are sort of like the Cinderella of accessibility in the blind community. A lot of blind people just don't realize how good Chromebooks have become lately. And they really are quite impressive. So if you can run an Android app on a Chromebook and then run it in Windows too, it may well push more of the blind community to Android itself. If they could get their Braille right, that's a big showstopper for me. I've got some notes here about the sum up from Satya Nadella, who's such a cool guy. I really enjoyed the book that he wrote, and he, I think, did a really inspiring job. I don't know whether it moved you guys to the same way that it did me. But
There was one thing he said in there that I found offensive in how wrong it was.
Okay, go on.
He said that the web was born and grew up on Windows.
Oh, yes, he did say that. Yeah.
That is wrong. The web was born on Next Step, which is the operating system that was basically the precursor to Mac OS X. I guess it kind of went through its toddlerhood and early childhood, to stretch the analogy, cross-platform, because NCSA Mosaic was cross-platform, Netscape was cross-platform, and then, arguably, Microsoft hijacked it. So, yes, it did kind of grow up on Windows, but I don't take that as a good thing.
There you go, Satya. You have been castigated. Well, he did, though. I think he articulated a really compelling value proposition.
Yes, I'll give you that.
Yeah. That Microsoft's been pinged a bit for being kind of boring. You know, many of us use Windows. We couldn't live without it. I couldn't do my job as efficiently without it. But Windows hasn't been perceived as being cool, you know. It's just something that you use. But what he talked about was how having the largest number of hardware options out there in their ecosystem meant that you could create or consume in the way that you chose to, that you weren't locked into one manufacturer that was trying to completely control your user experience, and that Windows was the operating system that let you get on with stuff the way you want while they get out of the way. And I thought, that's pretty awesome, actually. That's one of the best value add descriptions of Windows I have ever heard.
Yes, that has been historically true of Windows for a long time. I think that Microsoft, in their zeal to beat or at least match Apple at its own game, have maybe lost their way a bit on that, because going back to Windows 8, Windows has become somewhat more locked down. And I guess to some extent that's necessary for security, but Windows 10X threatened to go much further in that direction, and I'm glad that to all outward appearances that project has been shelved. Maybe they are getting back to their roots on that.
Terry, did you have any closing comments before we open it up about the whole Windows 11 launch and Satya Nadella's sum up?
I did have a couple of things. One was that a coworker and I were discussing this on Monday, which was before the actual announcement. But one of the things that intrigued me was that bench tests showed 15 to 20% improvement in performance. Whether that's true or not, that's significant. The other thing was, and this wasn't discussed at all, I did hear that one of the reasons they bought Nuance had to do with the medical transcription part of Dragon, that Microsoft wants to move into the medical field in a really big way.
Well, and remember, of course, that Microsoft is much bigger than Windows, so this could have more to do with their cloud services than anything else.
All right, so let's open it up. It is the witching hour where Matthew Horsfell is. Hope he hasn't turned into a pumpkin before he gets to speak on Clubhouse. Hi, Matthew.
Yes, I think I should be saying good morning, shouldn't
Yes,
I,
indeed.
right about now?
Yes.
But, it's good to be here. And this has been a really interesting panel discussion, and thanks for letting us listen into it. There were a few things I wanted to comment on, and of course I've now forgotten what they all are. But the one observation that I wanted to make right back at the start, we were talking about, or you were talking about the BIOS and making BIOSes accessible, and how on earth are we going to go and do this as a blind person? And I have successfully used Ira to make changes in the BIOS. They can tell you what is on the screen, and then they can also tell you what is selected on the screen. And as you up and down arrow, they can see the selection change and tell you that the selection has changed. They're remarkably patient.
They would have to be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they were, but I was given. I had a new computer. I bought the new computer, but I was I had it with onboard audio turned off, and so I had to go into the BIOS to turn onboard audio on, and they were very, very patient and just went through the whole process with me, and it all worked out. And a hack that I was told subsequently by a friend of mine was, what he has is a laptop with a USB capture card plugged into the laptop, and then he plugs his desktop into the capture card. So then when it's in the BIOS, you can either OCR the text that comes back, which gives you a really nice, clean, feed, so to speak, or you could go on TeamViewer on your laptop, and then the person can see the capture card that way. And that's a way that he's found to do it.
Now, what would really take that to the next level is if Microsoft or one of the Windows AT developers would implement something similar to Apple's screen recognition.
Yeah. Well, I always thought about this, just a little box that plugs in. I mean, sure, doing it in software would be brilliant, but I always wondered why you couldn't get a talking monitor, literally a talking monitor that you plugged in to an HDMI port and it had screen recognition built in, and thing or another.
That could, you might have just inspired a project for me to work on sometime.
Well, I'm glad I've done that, because I really want it and I really don't want to work on it.
He is the little red hen of technology. That's what he is.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, if someone else wants to do it, they're very welcome, because I wouldn't know where to start. But yeah, good luck with it, and I'll quite happily test it out for you if you want somebody to do that.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Matthew. Melissa, hello.
Hello, thank you for having me. Hope you guys are having a good day. So my thing with Windows 11 that I'm a little excited about is the use of the Android apps, and I guess the ability for developers to add more to the store, because one thing that has always disappointed me with Windows is that there aren't many writing options, and I'm a writer. So on the Mac, you've got Ulysses, which is very simple to use. You've got Scrivener, and Scrivener is not accessible on Windows. You've got apps like Day One for your journaling. Stuff like that just isn't available. And then, there's Mars Edit. So there's all these great writing apps on the Mac. But when you go to Windows, I have a blog. Windows Live Writer is a little, tedious to work with, but it has been done. I've done it before, but it's just the fact that there's not that many writing apps, other than like your simple notepad and word processor and the occasional, note-taking app or whatever. I just haven't found the writing experience on Windows to be useful. So I'm mainly on the Mac, and I have a Windows computer. Sadly, I mainly use my Windows computer for gaming and things like Team Talk and stuff, because all the stuff that I love to do, writing and audio, is primarily done on the Mac.
Wow, that does surprise me. What's wrong with good old Microsoft Word then?
Well, there's nothing wrong with Word. I still use it. Like, I'll use it for my schooling when I write papers. But the funny thing is I use Word on the Mac.
Right.
I just, and plus I like the synchronicity with iCloud. I like, just getting onto my Mac, opening Ulysses, and everything I've typed on my iPhone is right there. And I wish there was a more synchronizing experience, more writing apps on Windows, because that's just the kind of person I am. That's what I would like to make more use out of. And that's why I'm hoping that, like with the use of Android apps, I know I don't think there's a Scrivener for Android. I haven't heard about it, but stuff like that you can easily use on your Mac and your iPhone and stuff. They have Windows versions of it that either aren't accessible, or the Windows versions just don't exist. Like a really good blogging software that you can.
I think that Microsoft should work on some kind of development tool that would allow Mac app developers to port their apps to Windows. So basically a compatibility layer for that would allow Mac app developers to port their apps to Windows. They're talking about Windows being able to run all kinds of apps now, and obviously Apple would not allow Microsoft to enable actual Mac apps from the Mac App Store to run on Windows. But I think that Microsoft could do something to make it easier for developers to move their apps over without getting into legal trouble.
I'll tell you about my workflow, Melissa. I also love Ulysses. I think it's just a wonderful app, and it's one of the ways I really like to write. But what I've done is I've set it up so that it saves Markdown files in a Dropbox folder. And then I have an application that is integrated with Microsoft Word that imports and saves Markdown. So when I've written something in Ulysses, and I often do this if I'm waiting for a meeting, I just work on a report or something like that, it's saved in Ulysses, which automatically puts it in Dropbox. And then I bring it into Word, because Word now reads Markdown files with this add-on I got. And then I can just keep going. So it is seamless for me. The other thing I would say too about Word is that if you're using a WordPress blog, if you copy a Word document to the clipboard and paste it in, WordPress is remarkable about taking all that formatting across. All your headings are preserved. Everything just rocks. So I got to say, and I've written quite a few books, that Word for me in Windows is the best writing experience as a blind person that I have used, particularly with JAWS.
Yeah, see, I do use Word. Like I said, I'm not a fan of the ribbon, like you mentioned earlier. The ribbon is just, so I'm not against using Word. I guess for me, I just prefer that. Like I'm curious about that add-on that you have, because I never even heard of it.
It's called Writage. Writage is what it's called.
Writage?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really,
name.
really good. And I use it all the time. Yeah. Because when you've saved something in Markdown, you can also bring it into apps like IA Writer and iPhone, which is another good writing app that's on iOS. Yeah.
But see, like when we look for writing apps, one of the things that I recently connected with a woman on Clubhouse who they have a small publishing press, and she goes, I have a lot of low vision people. They're losing their sight and they want to write. And she said one woman told her, I feel like I'm running out of time. Before my vision is gone and I don't know how to write. And so when I connected with her, she's like, can you give me writing resources for Windows? And most of them, I'll be honest with you, come from iOS or the Mac, because of just their simplicity. That's, because when you're looking at people who are migrating to being able to use a screen, and then having to use VoiceOver now, or JAWS or whatever, it's for me, I mostly recommend Mac and iOS, which is sad because Windows is more, it's more readily available. So I'm really excited about the App Store and the Android apps, because I really think it's going to open a world of possibilities for writers like myself.
I know, Jonathan, that this conversation is about Windows, of course, but one of the things that's been an irritant for me for a long time is using Word or Excel to create HTML files that you want to port to a website, and all the junk that
Oh,
Microsoft
yeah.
puts
Really
into
bloated.
it. And you can't export accessible tables, and a lot of stuff just won't do that. And it's really sad too, because I don't care about every font that is in my library. I only care about the font that I'm actually using.
Let me very briefly suggest a tool that you might want to look at. It's a command line tool, but Terry, I'm sure that's not an issue for you.
No, it's
Pandoc.
not. Pandoc?
Yes, Pandoc can convert from between lots of different formats, including converting from Word to either HTML or Markdown.
Thank you.
There you go. We're all fountains of knowledge. Hey, thanks for sharing that, Melissa. I really appreciate it. Great contribution. My hope is that we will finally see an end to the weird audio issues that have been plaguing Windows, particularly on laptop devices, where the audio device hibernates so quickly that when you are trying to read with a screen reader, you get some of those words cut off. And of course, JAWS now
Not
has,
as long as they're trying to maximize their battery life specs.
well, yeah, there needs to be a choice. It's ridiculously short. And luckily, there is that third-party utility, Silenzio, and now JAWS has a feature built in. But, yes. All right. Don't get me started. Jessie is next. Hi, Jessie.
So going back to pre-boot experiences and the void of accessibility news or lack thereof that Microsoft has left us in, which your experience did mirror mine. So I was glad to see that I had looked for it and it just isn't available. It wasn't that I had missed it. They literally have not published anything about it. But one thing I did notice, which I'm concerned about, is that they're taking Cortana out of the first boot experience.
Yes.
And I understand the purpose of that. And obviously, if you want to batch install or batch image computers, you want it to be quick. But I was very excited to have it in my only first boot experience of Windows that I've had in the very recent past. And I'm hoping that there will still be some way to enable narrator or something like that. I'm wondering what you all think about what they're going to do.
Oh, I'm sure they're not going to lose the ability to enable narrator. The only question is whether there will be some kind of sound effect or audible indication that the out-of-box experience is up, or whether you just have to guess.
Right, like Mac says, you can turn on your voiceover with this key. And yeah, I hope they do something, because I was like, oh no, is the accessibility of the pre-boot going away, which was such an exciting thing to hear when it first, I only did it once and I hadn't gotten the memo that it was now accessible. And so to hear Cortana come in and chirpily tell me that she was ready to help was very exciting. So I was a little disappointed.
Yes, I see sighted people celebrating this. But this is one of the things that makes setting up a Mac such a joy as well, because when you get to a certain point, the little thing, I think you have to wait a few seconds of not doing anything, and eventually that really great voice comes on and says, "Welcome to," and off you go. So that's slightly unfortunate.
Well, I happen to know that one of my former colleagues from the Windows accessibility team went over to the out-of-box experience team, so maybe he will push for something like that.
Thanks, Jesse. Any other thoughts on Windows 11?
Not yet. I'll just have to see what happens.
You're going to install the Insider build?
I think I'm in the program. I believe I'm going to turn it off temporarily if I am. I'll have to double check. I kind of want to see what the buzz is, and it'll be interesting to see at my job whether they keep going with 10 for a while or whether they jump on board. Being a governmental agency, they'll probably do the former, but it'll be interesting to see. And I kind of want to have, since we have no news whatsoever on the accessibility front, I don't know if I want to be a guinea pig yet. If they had said anything, I would maybe try it. But since we don't know what things will look like.
When Microsoft eventually breaks the radio silence, what do you hope they will say about accessibility in Windows 11? Is there anything you're particularly hankering for?
I don't need narrator per se, because obviously there are plenty of other screen readers. I agree about the audio, although I do think Silenzio is doing a great job right now. But I don't find Teams particularly intuitive. I can certainly use it, but I think they should maybe make that the keyboard shortcuts more streamlined, and they should streamline UIA to, cut out a lot of the chatter that we don't need. Mostly simplify stuff.
You have pushed a button. Yeah. So this is one of the things that I find is that UIA is quite verbose, and somebody at Microsoft, I guess, is deciding that blind people need all this verbiage. And if a screen reader developer implements it as is without giving a user the ability to customize what they hear or what they see on a braille display, in my view, it can actually, it feels like they're almost killing us with kindness because there's just so much verbosity going on.
To be a bit nitpicky here, I don't think the problem is UI automation per se. I think it's just the conventions that the Office and Edge teams have decided to adopt.
Yes, absolutely.
Implementing it.
I take that.
Okay. Yeah. So every time, so it's kind of like having JAWS hints on all the time, except that they're not actually JAWS hints. So whenever you land on a button, it says press this, but press enter to do this and go up to. So you're saying that's actually code within the Office
Teams.
suite,
yes,
itself or Teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should shorten that.
You've been around a while, Terry, if you don't mind me saying. How do you feel about the verbiage that we now get in Windows? Do you think it's actually a retrograde step?
Well, it's an interesting question, actually, because I saw a discussion you were in about this some time ago, and I don't get it. And what I mean is I don't get the verbiage, and I don't know if it's because I have my verbosity set to maximum, off, and I have everything like tooltips, almost everything is turned off. So I don't get a lot of verbiage. The annoying part for me when I use Teams is people putting those bloody text messages in the window when you're trying to listen to a presentation.
Yeah. Well, the verbiage I'm talking about is when, for example, with Microsoft Edge now, which has switched from iAccessible 2 to UI automation in the most recent public build. Now, when a page is loading, it says loading page and loading complete. And then when you press the button to go back, it says going back and all this kind of nonsense. I mean, I don't want that.
I find the loading complete notification in particular annoying because very often, at least with NVDA, that notification will interrupt the screen reader's attempt to automatically start reading the new page.
Mm.
It's kind of funny, though, because I actually like it. I don't necessarily like it at home, but I do like it at work where we have SharePoint, which can sometimes take forever to load, and it's nice to know when it's actually done.
So I've got no problem with you liking it. I just want to be able to turn it off because I don't like it, and we're not being given the choice.
Yes. What I wish would happen with the loading notifications in particular is that Microsoft, and in particular the Windows accessibility team that I used to be on, would define some standard notification categories like loading started, loading completed, and then give applications a way to identify the type of notification so that if an application is firing a well-known standard type of notification like loading page or loading complete, that the screen reader could choose to either do nothing if that's your preference or play a sound effect.
What's interesting, though, is that when you get the loading complete, it doesn't always mean that you can move your arrow keys right away. So is it really complete?
That's also a good point because a lot of web applications these days are so heavy on the JavaScript that even if the browser is done with its part of the loading process, the application may have to run some hefty JavaScript processing to finish setting things up. So you have to wait a little longer for that to settle down.
See what you started, Jesse? See what you started?
And
I think I
don't
did
don't get
notice.
me started on the whole thing about applications about websites where you click a link and it uses some JavaScript to load the new page in place, and either you get nothing, or the best that can happen, which still isn't very good, is that the application does its own non-standard notification to tell you that you've landed on the new page.
Alert, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Love.
I do like the Edge notification that you can't go back any farther, because as someone who does open some tabs, multiple tabs in web browsers, not a billion of them, but a few, sometimes I forget what page I've opened the tab to, and so if I keep going back and I eventually hear, "Oh, you can't go back any further," then I think, "Oh, wait, I'm at the start of this tab that I've opened. I can close this tab now because I don't need it, because I can't go back to the page I want." So I do like that one, but the other ones I can leave. And my other remark on your what you've just said, all of you, is that I think I heard that Microsoft is doing a study right now about the possibility of using sounds instead of verbiage with certain browser notifications. I still would like the chance to cut them out altogether, but at least if you could choose a sound, that would.
Well, we need the option,
make it-
because sounds obviously wouldn't work for deafblind users.
Yeah. That's something they have, in fact, tweeted about. Yes, if you go back into the MSFT-enabled Twitter account, you can find the link to that survey where they're encouraging people to fill it out. I'm not sure if it's still open or not. Thank you so much, Jesse. Appreciate it. Great contribution. Douglas, hello, in Ontario, Canada.
Hi, Jonathan. I'm hoping with Windows 11, and I'm not sure if it still exists, but I haven't seen it myself. I could just be missing where it is. But when applications had their own separate volumes, so like JAWS, for instance, you could turn the volume down, or especially when you're using a screen reader, and say you're in Zoom, and it overpowers when you're trying to listen.
The per application volume control that you probably know from Windows 7 or Vista before that definitely does still exist in Windows 10. I think it's a bit buried now, but yeah, I hope they don't get rid of that in Windows 11. If they do get rid of the application, that feature is from the what I would say is the more open era of Windows, where a third-party application could probably reconstruct it.
Yeah, the mute button on the taskbar in Windows 11 is interesting. We didn't talk about this, but there's now going to be an option to mute your microphone no matter what application you're in, just so, because I guess video and audio conferencing has become such a big thing. So that's nice.
Actually, now that you bring that up, it just reminded me. I've heard that the start menu, I'm not sure if this is true, but I've been hearing some rumors that the start button is right in the middle of the screen now. The start option, sorry.
That is true. So the taskbar, which includes the start button, is still at the bottom of the screen, but horizontally, the start button and whatever application icons are there on the taskbar are visually centered. And I have read a couple of comment threads where sighted people were railing against that change, because there's a classic rule or principle of visual UI design, which says that if you can put something in the corner, then it's easier to move to it with the mouse, because you just have to yank your mouse cursor down to the corner and you're on the start button or whatever. And now that it's centered, it's not going to be as easy to hit with the mouse. I don't care. I use the keyboard. Yeah, there has been, and of course, there will always be backlash against user interface changes in Windows or anything, really.
As I recall, Matt, wasn't that actually part of what the Windows X was supposed to do? Like, this is not the first time that Microsoft has gone down that road.
Yes, the new taskbar with the centered icons does, at least to my eyes, look kind of like what they did in Windows 10X.
It's been a really interesting discussion, and of course, there will be a lot more to say at some point when we get information on the accessibility of Windows 11, what might be coming in the Rata. Any final thoughts from you, Terry? I actually haven't asked you this question because you can answer it safely. What do you think or hope might come to Narrator in Windows 11? What do you think it needs?
Well, I'd like to see it continue to evolve, Jonathan, but one of the things that I would really like to see them do with Narrator, even though it's built into the operating system, is have its own update schedule. Because they're moving to a once-a-year platform, I'd rather not be waiting for it to improve. And I've had experience in moving from Windows 10, 17 to 18 to 19 to 20. And each time we upgrade at work, Narrator gets better, but it only stays better until we do the next upgrade. So I'd like to see it be a download for the old systems as well, Jonathan, and updated more frequently than just when Windows is.
Matt, have you got any final comments on Windows 11 before we wrap up?
Like I said, I'm apprehensive about the changes to the start menu, but I will certainly be interested to see how the Android support works out and what the store changes mean for developers, because of course I am a developer myself. So, and I will be a guinea pig on the insider builds if there's any way I can.
Wonderful. Matt Campbell and Terry Bray, thank you so much for your thoughts on Windows 11. I'm sure there will be more to say when we find out about accessibility in Windows 11, and I really appreciate your insights, so thank you both. Now, while that Clubhouse event was underway, Microsoft broke its silence to some extent, and I will read you the extent of what has been tweeted from the MSFT Enable account. It says, accessibility is essential to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. Windows 11 is built, designed with and for people with disabilities. Coming soon, we'll share more about what's coming later this year. As a taster, we're addressing top feedback to make Windows 11 accessibility easier to find and use. We rebranded ease of access settings to accessibility. We redesigned them to make it easier to use too. We've invested deeply in Windows 11 to make accessibility just work in more scenarios. For example, Office in the Cloud is now accessible with local assistive technologies like Narrator. Windows 11 was designed to be accessible from the start. More details coming soon. We're excited, and we hope you will be too. That's the full extent of what Microsoft has said at the time of producing this. If you go to the Microsoft Accessibility webpage, there is not a word about Windows 11, and there's no explanation in those tweets about why Microsoft was not or is not ready to say more about accessibility in Windows 11. Wouldn't that have been great if, as well as a special seminar for developers, there was a special seminar going into the weeds of accessibility? It's not to be, and we're still left wanting other than that very specific and encouraging tidbit about Microsoft in the cloud. Watch this space. We'll keep you posted.
Be the first to know what's coming in the next episode of Mosen at Large. Opt into the Mosen media list and receive a brief email on what's coming so you can get your contribution in ahead of the show. You can stop receiving emails anytime. To join, send a blank email to media-subscribe@mosen.org. That's media-subscribe@mosen.org. Stay in the know with Mosen at Large.
Jonathan Mosen, Mosen at Large Podcast.
Bryant Walker wrote this before the Microsoft announcement of a few days ago. There are a couple of things I would like to see in Windows 11. First of all, you might remember the Windows XP days, when the Save As, Open and Other dialogues had a look-in combo box instead of that tree view and stuff we now see. To me, these dialogues were much simpler to use and much less clunky. I also hope there are some improvements done on Narrator. I am not a primary Narrator user, but I have used it sometimes. I must commend Microsoft for sticking with Narrator and not just abandoning it. This is not the attitude they used to have back in the day, and I am glad that they have gotten their act together over the last few years. I hope that the vocalizer voices will be included in the Razor now that Microsoft has acquired Vocalizer. And Brian Gaff in the UK reminds me, the first Office with the ribbon was 2007. I have Windows 7 and Word 2003 still runs on it. There has been talk about Windows 10 being continued under the corporate side for some years. I am not sure what to think. It seems to me that what Microsoft really want to do is develop a new OS from the ground up, as what we have at the moment is a mess of bits from all Windows cores, tracing back to NT. It's got to the point that it's almost impossible to make it better because nobody can trace the code fragments back. They surely need a new chip like Apple has to make portable computing viable. Intel seem to have got into a rut and seemingly stalled. Not sure what the point of 11 is unless it has an embedded Android simulator in it. And this would allow some things to run in a virtual machine. If that is the case, then this has to be aimed at consumers, not commercial customers. I would like to definitely see different shells. One involving no ribbons. They are illogical and completely counterintuitive as they have bits of several types of things on them. I would like to be free from the mega effectively new install every few months, which is still why I'm on Windows 7. The legacy software I needed and still need to run need a complete reinstall every time. Losing emails and newspaper indexing and taking up time reconfiguring stuff. So just fix bugs, don't change it every few months. If they do that, then I'm happy. NVDA is dropping Windows 7 after this year, due to Python dropping it. I fully suspect that Microsoft will stop updating the antivirus for 7 soon, and that would lead to a lot of security issues. Yep, it's an obsolete operating system now, Brian, so no surprise there. I really haven't had any problem updating from one version of Windows 10 to another. I haven't had to reinstall anything. On one or two occasions, I have had my audio go a bit strange because I have so many audio devices, but I have not had to reinstall a single piece of software as a result of updating my Windows. And actually, I got 21H1 pushed to the studio PC the other day, and it messed with my audio interfaces then. Christopher Wright says, I was wrong about Windows 11 merely being a visual overhaul. It appears they're going to add a lot of new stuff. I'm most interested in narrator improvements, as well as Android app support. I wonder if we will be able to use TalkBack. Unfortunately, the system requirements for Windows 10 freak me out. It seems like a lot, and I do mean a lot of computers will be unable to run Windows 11 as it requires UEFI firmware with secure boot, a TPM 2.0 chip, and a 64-bit processor. I'm not really bothered by the 64-bit CPU, but the rest is crazy. I used the Microsoft Health Check tool on both my 2013 MacBook Air and 2016 GPD Win, and according to it, they're both unsupported. I have a bunch of computers that range in age from 2007 to 2016. Many of these were rescued from other people's trash, and they all run Windows 10 like a champ. It looks like most, if not all, of these devices will be unable to run 11, which is ridiculous. Perhaps I'm overreacting, but I always thought Microsoft was all about backwards compatibility and supporting older devices for as long as possible. Then again, we'll have to wait until the finished product is out there to know for sure. I wonder if it's possible to run 11 in a virtual machine with all these changes. They lied when they said Windows 10 would be the last major version, and apparently they're more than willing to force people to go out and buy new hardware. They're starting to remind me of Apple, who does this crap all the time. It looks like the folks in Redmond want more money. Plus, there is a mandatory requirement to use a Microsoft account to set up Windows 10 Home for the first time. There used to be a way to skip this and make a local account by disconnecting from the internet, but this doesn't seem to be the case anymore based on what I'm reading. What are these people smoking? I hate signing into my computer with a Microsoft account. It's unnecessary and irritating. Maybe if enough people post negative feedback regarding this change in the Insider program, they will reverse this absurd decision before the public release. I know I definitely will if I can get the system to run on any of my computers, either natively or virtually. This is beyond ridiculous. Yeah, I don't think you'll have any difficulty getting it to run in your virtual machine, Christopher. That should be fine if you've got VMware Fusion on your Mac. I believe that they are emulating the requirements in software there regarding TPM and Secure Boot. I personally don't mind signing in with a Microsoft account because data syncs between my desktop and my laptop that I find quite useful. But what I do need is the ability for the folder names on each machine to be the same. And we've talked about this on recent episodes of the podcast. This way, it makes it easy for me to keep apps like Reaper in sync across devices, and I would be quite disgruntled if that is not possible in Windows 11. And we're going to give Brian Gaff a second bite of the cherry because he sent his first comments in before Windows 11 was announced. Now he says, I just listened to your podcast on the launch and the belated press release about accessibility. My feelings on this are that they have discovered major flaws in the accessibility and hence did not want to have egg on face at this time. It does not bode well if they are contemplating launching in a couple of months, still with major bugs to sort out. It would surely suit them better to have kept quiet and delayed it for a couple more months of testing. Do we know if they have a core of, in this case, blind testers looking at this? Could it really be, as I suspect, that major bolt-ons like Android, etc., have just not any way to be accessible at all, and they suddenly realized this? Unfortunately, the problem major companies have is communicating with themselves internally, and we have seen that in Apple, Samsung, and elsewhere. My feeling was, as I said before, they wanted something new, since their major rewrite has not been finished yet, and it's a makeover job and nothing more. I have not heard from the NVDA team about how much they knew, but from the tone of what I read, it seems like the decision to not call it Windows 10 Plus or something was made quite late on. Brian, my understanding is that assistive technology vendors may not have seen any Windows 11 build at this stage, and while I completely appreciate that speculation fills a vacuum, the reality is that we just don't know. We don't know whether this is some major public relations debacle. If you go to the Microsoft.com website, you will see Windows 11 prominently displayed on that homepage, as you would expect. It is a major thing when the operating system powering most of the world's computers changes in such a significant way. So they're going to trumpet this. But you go to the Microsoft Disability site, and there is nothing on that site about Windows 11. Even after that self-professed taster thread on Twitter, there is nothing at the time of producing this show on the Windows accessibility site about Windows 11. It is a bizarre situation, and I just don't know whether that's because of a communication snafu or something much more serious. Regarding your question about testing, this is the question many people are starting to ask now. You can get on the Windows Insider builds. Anybody can do that. If you want to do it, you can do it. And you can test these builds. But with so little to say about accessibility, people are wondering whether that's a good thing to do or not. And I would hope that if this is some sort of technical issue, that Microsoft will, before the release of the insider builds of Windows 11, be absolutely transparent about that, because we don't want people bricking their systems. So if it's more than a PR thing, then hopefully we will know that in the coming days.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
There are more radio memories shared by listeners this week, and Andy starts us off. Hi, Jonathan. Here in the US, networks were starting to concentrate on television in the early 1950s. From then until the mid-70s, radio here was heavily independent and competitive. Companies were only allowed 1 AM and 1 FM station per market. There was so much competition on the air. This caused each station to be more fun, more serious, or whatever they were trying to be. Things got even better in 1966. The FCC ruled that FM stations in medium and large markets were required to separate programming from their AMs at least 50% of the time. Many of those stations automated programming, but even some of that was quite creative. The best ones put on live programming that was, for the corporations, as cheap as possible. This meant underpaid young music enthusiasts. To the listeners, it was new and exciting sounds and ideas. That fabulous era was short-lived, maybe 5 years. By then, station owners began to recognize the value of their FM signals. They began tightening up the formats with ratings in mind. Even some of the AM stations dabbled in FM-style creativity. I felt like a mighty explorer in those days, trying to tune in FM with a serious rooftop antenna and nighttime AM from all over the country when reception was good. Thanks so much for sharing that perspective, Andy. I really appreciate that. I started to get acquainted with some commercial American radio that we just didn't have access to when streaming media became a thing in the late 1990s. And there was, and I'm pleased to say still is, a wonderful website called realradio.com, and that is spelled R-E-E-L, radio.com. It was curated for a long time and started by a guy called Uncle Ricky, who I believe has died now, but it is still being maintained, and they have over 3,000 radio air checks. Many of them are really good quality. And when this site came online in the late 1990s, I just binged on it. Whenever they would upload new content every week, I would listen. And we got a few of those names here through syndicated shows, so I knew about people like Robert W. Morgan and a number of other broadcasters, but I got exposed to so many more really great broadcasters I hadn't heard of before. People like Dan Ingram and Cousin Brucey and Charlie Tooner and just radio legends from the United States. That is a great site, and I was inspired by it.
Hi, Jonathan. Radio memories. Well, I have a few here. Especially between Tamarinui and Auckland. You mentioned Tamarinui. I didn't realise what the call sign was there for 1512 King Country Radio it was. What did I remember? Because it was the only station in town back then in the 80s. But we did get Radio Rima on the FM band in Tamarinui. And I'd listened to the Saturday Countdown. There was a countdown that Radio Rima had. I haven't listened to that station in a long time. And that countdown was on, I think it was the top 20 countdown on Radio Rima. It was broadcast into Tamanini on FM. King Country Radio was the game in town. And whenever I went home during the holidays, I'd listen to the birthday calls at 10 to 8 with Bruce Russell. Was one of the hosts there, and people would know that is the same Bruce Russell that's now on News Talk ZB. He read my birthday calls out several times when I was on holiday in Tamanini. I've still got the one on cassette when I turned 17. And there were other people on King Country Radio back then, like there was Paul Roman and Luke With were the hosts that I can remember from those days, and they actually did some awesome OB shows in the middle of town on a street, and they were quite fun to listen to. But King Country Radio was only on air for the mornings, from I think it was from 6 a.m. to about midday, I think. You had various newsreaders like Simon Dickinson and I think Vicky Mackay was there. Murray Borgie and Peter Sletner. I don't think they were around anymore. I heard Murray Borgie died, but don't know what happened with Peter Sletner when he retired. He was one of the newsreaders I can remember. Now, Auckland Radio was a completely different thing. I would record stuff from 91 FM, rock of the 90s it was then, and classic hits 1251 ZM it was. Yes, it was called ZM, way before the ZM that people know today. In fact, on Wikipedia it says ZM actually started in Manurewa in the 1920s, so it'll be almost 100 years of ZM in a few years' time. In fact, it'll be almost 100 years of radio in New Zealand soon, either next year or the year after. Yeah, ZM started out in Manurewa, and there was this network called the Mosquito Network, and it broadcasted American programming, which was before our time, and 89 FM was Auckland's music leader, and News Talk ZB. And of course we had the Paul Holmes Breakfast, which went for a long time, up until 2008 I think, was the last time he was on the air. He retired and said that he's no longer with us. And then other stations came on, like 93 Oldies, I think it was. I think that came on air in 1990 or 91, because there was this huge countdown build-up being read by a computer. It was just, I went like 45,043, 45,043, 41, and it did this huge countdown until the launch of Oldies 93. Then it changed to Cool 93, and then went to Solid Gold, and then now it's the Sound.
Thanks, David. That's David Harvey reporting in from Auckland. What happened in New Zealand was that in the late 1980s, the way that radio frequencies were allocated in New Zealand completely changed. Before then, you used to have to make an application to a body called the Broadcasting Tribunal, and they would take a lot of things into account, like the scarcity of the frequencies. Was anybody else doing something similar already? The public good component. So it was very much a social decision. But then radio became deregulated and frequencies went up for sale to the highest bidder. It meant that there was a lot more radio, which meant that radio was more networked and more automated, and in my view, the quality wasn't as good. But it also meant, particularly in the early 1990s, that radio was in a real state of flux. Stations would go up and down the dial and change formats at the drop of a hat. It was a very strange time for New Zealand radio, and I'm not sure that we're better off as a result of it all.
Greetings, Mosen at Largers. This is Stan Luttrell in Medford, Oregon, and because of recent activity, I feel it's about time that I chimed in. Chime. And I wanted to talk about some of the things that have been going on recently. You talked about radio. Radio, like many others, especially those of us that are blind, it was very instrumental in developing who we are. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the town of Pittsburgh, the one without the H in it. I lived in Pittsburgh, California. And the radio stations that I grew up with were stations like KEWB in Oakland, KNE, which later became KNEW, KNBR in San Francisco, KFRC, KSFO, long before it became what it is currently now. And there were some people that have ended up being really instrumental in my life as it currently exists. One of my friends that became instrumental in my life was a person that was originally, I became familiar with him at KJOY in Stockton, and he went on to work for KEWB, which later became KNEW in Oakland. He is a gentleman by the name of Ron Reynolds, and many of you may know him from KCBS, because he did all news there, and he was a program director at both KNEW and then later at KNBR, which was called KNBR 68. And the first job that I had as an intern was for KNBR's FM station, which was KYUU, or as some of us used to jokingly call it, KY screw you. And what I did was ratings research. So I played snippets of songs that were on a cassette, and it was great when the tape machine worked, but sometimes I got a faulty tape machine, and that was always interesting. And I did some stuff for KNBR as well. In fact, I hosted a public affairs program, one of them, and that was interesting. It was a program on disabilities. And later, between him, Ron Reynolds helped me get this internship job, along with a mutual friend of ours, Ron Lyons. And he was another person who was very instrumental in me doing what I'm doing now. And fast forward to 1987, when I met another icon of Bay Area radio, and you can look up both of these people on YouTube. You can find clips of their work. Dr. Don Rose was his name, and he had a very interesting shtick, and it was sort of a throwback to earlier time. Going back to the first person, I forgot to mention that Ron Reynolds once did a kids show, cartoons, where they had cartoons and things like that. And he did a ventriloquist bit, and it was called Ron and Jimmy. Oh, and he hates to be reminded of that. That was something he would just soon forget. But it was one of the things that we knew him. And his friend Ron Lyons helped me out, gave me some of his work, which I did for a speech and communications class at San Francisco State. And that was interesting. But going back to Dr. Don Rose, he was very instrumental. In fact, that's where I got my first on-air shtick, where I, along with a friend of mine, used to do weather forecasts. And what happened was, I had originally started providing weather information to a gentleman by the name of Leo Cellino, who was at KGO News Talk 810 for years and years, and he used to have people that were called spotters that would provide weather information like current temperatures, and I had a little setup in my backyard where I lived at the time, and I would provide him information. Of course, you got to remember, a lot of times in radio, when you're starting out, you do things and you don't get paid nothing. No, sometimes you are, basically, that's an intern in 1987. I started doing weather forecasts, and later went to a couple of other small stations in the Bay Area, and I even did a couple weather forecasts for K101 in San Francisco, which is a big FM station. And so I did that, and later on I went to do weather for K1, a little small station in Concord, California. And I know you know, Jonathan, where Concord is, because you once worked in Concord. Currently, what I'm doing weather forecasts for low-power AM and FM stations, in a couple of them, in Half Moon Bay, California. A friend of mine contacted me and said, well, how would you like to do weather? And I said, well, I'm interested, but I will not work for free. We can talk if you show me the money, and we can talk. I won't say the exact wording that I used, because that wouldn't be family friendly, but it put the point across. And so that is how things ended up where I'm doing what I'm doing today. And of course, I do a podcast for an organization that works to alleviate problems of homelessness here in the Rogue Valley of Oregon. And that gives me to a new thing that I want to talk about. You've always talked about us bringing forth the possibility of different kinds of things. Well, I have learned that there are now self-administered coronavirus tests. Now, I don't know of a way for blind people to be able to access doing those tests. I mean, I guess you could use a service like Ira or Be My Eyes, but it would be interesting to see if we could eventually get to do things on our own.
Thank you very much, Dan. Well, first of all, those radio memories, I'm sure that those names will bring back memories for those people in the area who listened to radio over the years, and they may be motivated to make some contributions about their radio memories. And you've also segued us nicely into talking about actually working on the radio, which a number of blind people have had the privilege of doing. And Stan mentioned in his email to me, not the voice attachment we just heard, but the accompanying email, that he did come across people who said, how can a blind person do the weather? And of course, this is the thing, you're always proving yourself. And even if you've got a track record when you're on one radio station, you have to prove yourself all over again. For me, I found when I was working in commercial radio full-time, the one who was the most skeptical was the operations manager, the person who looked after the equipment. And they would say, well, you may have been able to work the equipment on this other radio station, but I feel sure that a blind person couldn't work the equipment on ours, and you'd have to convince the operations person all over again. But what I often found was eventually you would win them over, and that the operations person liked working with me as a blind person because I was listening rather than just looking at the meters. So sometimes I was the person who was chosen to be on the air when they wanted to make adjustments at the transmitter. So I don't know, sometimes you've got to be careful what you wish for when people like that have increased confidence in you. Regarding self-tests for COVID-19, that's not something available to us in New Zealand at present. So if anyone's had some experience of that and using them as a blind person, please do feel free to share. Over to Texas, Kathy Blackburn says, when I was small, I was sick often, and the radio was company for me. I remember a children's program called Big John and Sparky. No school today. I assume it ran only on Saturday. There is an example of it on YouTube. I don't know which radio network it ran on. I'm not sure what sort of creature Sparky was supposed to be. Big John was obviously an adult human. Sparky had a high voice, possibly created the same way as were the voices of the three chipmunks in the 1960s. In the early morning, probably in what later came to be called drive time, radio station KTBC had a local program with a personality called Cactus Pryor. He sometimes allowed his two children to come on the show. I'm pretty sure he played music, told a few jokes, maybe read some of the commercials. Later in the morning, there was a variety show with Arthur Godfrey. Then came some soap operas, such as The Romance of Helen Trent, Ma Perkins, The Secret Storm, and The Guiding Light. Those last two shows migrated to television. The Guiding Light ran on television until the 1980s, I think. Other shows I remember hearing were Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, The Life of Riley, the Lux Radio Theatre, and Mr. District Attorney. As I grew older, I became interested in listening to more distant stations. At night, when reception was best, I could hear WLS in Chicago, WHAS from Louisville, and WHO from Iowa. I especially enjoyed WHAS because Milton Metz, who also narrated talking books for APH, had a nightly call-in show. By the time I was in high school, I could understand enough Spanish to listen to Mexican radio stations. My maternal grandfather had a short-wave radio. Sorry, I don't know the brand, but I can remember hearing the BBC, Radio Moscow, Radio Havana, Deutsche Welle, and Radio Netherlands. Later, when I had a short-wave radio of my own, I sometimes heard Radio Peking. In the 1960s, I began listening to KUT, the University of Texas FM station. It's where I discovered The Goon Show. Another program KUT carried was called Reading Aloud. I believe it was produced by WGBH in Boston. The man who did the show was named Bill Cavness. I have never been able to find any recordings of this show. Among the books he read were The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Don Quixote, The Dean's Watch, and a couple of P.G. Wodehouse Bertie Wooster novels. Congratulations for being entrusted with the Small World recordings. Thank you for introducing the program's founder to us and for including some of these shows on Mushroom Escape.
Hello, Jonathan. This is Allison Fallon in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A couple of radio memories. I guess they're not strictly radio memories because it was in the days of I think it was an RCA. It was a radio. It had Braille on the turn dials, and the nice thing about it was at the low end of the dial, I could get our local ABC station, and I used to listen to Ben Casey all the time. I don't know whether you even had him in New Zealand, but as far as strictly radio, I used to listen to My True Story on WGN, which was, of course, in Chicago, and I did it very quietly, and when my mother found out, she was not happy because there were some pretty questionable things for a 12-year-old to hear, but I was fascinated. As far as Windows 11, I'm upset about it because I just bought a tutorial for Windows 10. I can use Windows 10, but I decided I'd go for it and buy a tutorial, so I'm hoping Windows 11 won't be hugely different. Love your show, even though some of it I don't understand because it's way too techie for me, but I really enjoy it.
Well, it's always lovely to hear from you, Alison, and thank you for sticking with it even when it's a bit techie. Bonnie has commented to me before that some of the talking books she used to listen to would attract her parents' attention if one of her parents wandered into the room and she was listening to a talking book, because some of them could be on the raunchy side. So that's a show that I'm not familiar with, but it's a great story. Now from Darren McDougall. Hi, Jonathan. I could probably fill an entire podcast with radio memories. Well, that would make my life easy, Darren. Radio has been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. Anything could happen in radio in the old days, as you know. A record could get stuck and the announcer would have to turn it off or figure a way around it. I was a countdown listener for many years, both local countdowns and syndicated shows, such as Casey's Top 40 and Countdown America with Dick Clark. For the 3 or 4 hour countdown, I might get up to go to the bathroom or to get a snack, but that would be it. You definitely didn't answer the phone. I was always fascinated by the AM radio at night, how we could pull in so many sports and talk stations from Boston, New York, Detroit, and New Jersey here in Atlantic Canada. Nighttime channel surfing was a great pastime, especially during the summer when these stations seemed to come in even better. I could go on forever. I have so many memories attached to different radio shows and announcers, sudden format changes, etc. But I'll cut it off for now. Terrestrial radio, for the most part now, is pretty terrible. But we have online radio, Sirius XM, and our memories. Thank you, Darren. Of course, on the other side of the microphone, the worst thing was if you put on a long record like Hey Jude or Harry Chapin's Taxi or Stairway to Heaven or Bohemian Rhapsody. It's amazing how those records just trip off the tongue because you, as the broadcaster, were going to do a bathroom break and then that record got stuck. Well, that was a bit embarrassing. David Kingsbury is in touch. Good to hear from you, David. He says, thanks for your great podcast, The Gift That Keeps On Giving. Let me share with you a big frustration I face every year around March and April when it is time to prepare my United States tax return. I prepare both my federal and state tax returns with TurboTax, an Intuit product. This process is fully accessible with a screen reader. Their approach is to walk you through the process one question per page. The various form elements behave correctly. Content consistently starts on each page at properly designated main regions. Next and back buttons are easy to find. Summary pages are easily navigable. Many blind people use TurboTax to file their taxes and generally have few accessibility problems with this part of the process. However, the final product, that is the completed tax returns that goes to the federal and state governments, is a different story. The file is an incomprehensible mess of a PDF if you are a screen reader user. The PDF file for my completed 2020 tax forms totaled 31 pages. No headings appeared anywhere, hampering my ability to navigate through it. Worse still, financial data are presented in tables, but because they are not properly formatted for screen reader users, none of the column and row data line up right. This makes it impossible for me to read through and understand any of the content. To understand anything, I must ask a sighted family member, friend, or total stranger to help out. I can either sacrifice my privacy or forego an understanding of my tax forms. This is not a choice sighted people have to make. I have a similar problem with the forms sent to me by Fidelity Investments, the company that handles my investments, and Wells Fargo, the company that holds a mortgage loan for my house. I strongly suspect this problem of inaccessible PDFs is widespread among financial services companies. I would like to ask you and your listeners 3 questions. First, if there are any PDF remediation experts out there, is it technically possible for a company that needs to prepare millions of financial statements to auto-generate properly remediated PDFs in bulk? Second, do your listeners have similar PDF accessibility problems, and if so, with which financial services companies? And finally, do your listeners have any examples of properly prepared financial reports where the tabular information is comprehensible? Keep up the good work, and I look forward to some useful feedback. I look forward to it too, David. Obviously, the US tax system and how taxes are prepared is quite different from what we have here, but the majority of our listeners reside in the United States, so let's open it up. These are some important questions, but you have resolved a long-standing dilemma for me, David. I always wondered why former President Trump never released those tax returns, and now I get it. He was probably a screen reader user, and he couldn't inspect them, so he didn't want to release what he couldn't verify, and I totally get that. You may recall that quite some time ago, James wrote in with his initial findings on the Oticon More hearing aids. Now he has more on the Oticon More. He writes, "Good morning, Jonathan. Further to my last mention of the Oticon More aids, I had a follow-up visit from my audiologist yesterday. My comment about the aids seeming to pick out the loudest noise rather than focusing on speech seems to have resolved itself. Whether this was as a result of the deep neural network learning of the aids by itself, or whether it was my own central nervous plasticity, I don't know, but fancy it was the latter. I am still certain that these aids are far and away the best I have tried. It just seems as though there is a far more comprehensive soundscape coming into my brain. Without the aids, I have only the slightest awareness of birdsong in the garden, but with the aids, I am stunningly made aware of their presence. When compared to my original Oticon Open aids, they are markedly better. Before getting the Oticon More devices, I tried the Open S, Phonak Paradise, Resound Marie microphone and receiver in ear, and found them wanting. Clearly, all hearing impairments vary, but for anyone setting out on the path of hearing aid selection, I would certainly recommend the Oticon More. Note, anyone trying hearing aids is entitled to at least a month of trial with a guarantee of full refund if not happy. Please research the prerequisites of what a proper assessment and fitting should entail. Cliff Olson has very clear YouTube videos on all of these important aspects. Like you, Jonathan, I am waiting for Oticon to bring out the replaceable battery version of the aids, and my audiologist is quite happy to let me borrow these rechargeable ones, which I have had since February. Thanks, James, for the update. Really encouraged by that, and it sounds like you have a keeper in your audiologist there who's being so flexible. you are tempting me to give them a try when the replaceable battery version does come out, provided, of course, I can continue to use my direct audio input cable, which is an absolute must for me. Hour number 3, see time flies when you're having fun, of Mosen at Large is coming on at you if you choose to stay tuned on Mushroom FM, on YouTube, on Clubhouse, on Twitter, and on Facebook. We're everywhere, I tell you. The Bunny Bulletin is coming up. We're going to be talking about whether blindness advocacy has lost its mojo, problems with Safari on iOS, and a whole bunch more. Hope you'll stay with us.
Mushroom FM, the home of the fun guys.
Good times, great music, and personality to spare. You're digging the mushroom.
Mushroom FM. Mosen at Large Podcast.
Always good to have your company. If you'd like to be in touch with the show, let me just run down the contact information for you in case you are relatively new, and it's good to hear from listeners new and regular alike. Jonathan at mushroomfm.com is my email address. Now, if you want, you can record a voice memo or an MP3 file, anything like that, and attach it to the email, or send me a Dropbox link or a cloud service link if you prefer to do that, Jonathan at mushroomfm.com, or you can just write something down if you would rather do that. All I ask is that you spell check it and stuff like that. It makes it so much easier, and don't dictate it. If you're going to dictate it, you may as well record it. You can also call the listener line. That number is 86460-MOSEN, 864-606-6736 in the United States. You can tweet with the Mushroom FM hashtag, so you just send a tweet and you put the number sign and Mushroom FM in it. And you can also leave a message in the box on YouTube or Facebook, and actually I need to check in to see if anybody has, and we will gladly get it that way, so we certainly appreciate your contributions. And time now, after that beautiful moving music, for another edition of the Bunny Bulletin with Bonnie Mosen.
Hi guys.
How are you?
I'm good, and Eclipse is here too.
It's a special day today.
It is a special day.
It's your wedding anniversary.
And yours too.
What a coincidence!
And Helen Keller's birthday.
A coincidence. It's both of our wedding anniversaries.
Yeah, actually, I found out from my friend Christina that several of our friends were married on this day, so it's a good day for weddings, I guess.
The 27th New Zealand time, and it's the 26th US time, and I remember it so clearly because when I got up on our wedding day, we were doing the tradition of you being somewhere else.
I was at the Trentham Motel.
Yeah, nice.
With the rest. It's not quite as dodgy as it sounds.
And I was with Anthony, that's right.
Because Mark couldn't stay.
Mark was my best man, but he was not well. So I was with him. And then when I got up that morning, I heard the big Supreme Court news about the gay marriage. And I thought, what a great auspicious start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And we had quite the modern online wedding. So we had a smallish number of guests.
About 65, which is a good number. Nice number.
Yeah. Present at the Trentham Racecourse.
The champagne room at the Trentham Racecourse.
Tremendous, yes, because we sort of thought, well, do we want a ceremony, or shall we just trot on down to the registry office? And we decided to do the ceremony. And then we decided, well, where? And because of your love of racing, we thought,
my racetrack connections.
Yeah.
I thought it would be great to do it at the race course.
Yes.
So it was really cool.
And then what we did was we actually streamed the wedding.
Yeah.
On the Mosen channel.
We did, yes.
We had a day of sort of tributary programming because we played the first time you and I met, which is cool that we have a recording of. Well, the second time technically. Yeah, I don't remember much about the first.
You don't know because he was inebriated or anything like that. Got to clarify that you don't remember much about it.
It was just fleeting.
Yeah.
We were in an exhibit hall.
Yeah, I just said hi, basically. That was
Hi.
it. I'm sure he had several hundred people saying hi to him that day.
Yeah, well.
I don't know if there was even several hundred people at that conference.
That event was a tiny one.
Yeah. It was nice, though. It was probably, honestly, one of my favorite conventions because it was small. You know, the hotel was easily navigable. losing my voice. And, there wasn't the tons of canes and dogs and things and, that you usually get with one of those big conventions. So it was kind of, the smaller ones are nice.
It was a nice little convention, that is true.
Yeah.
But
and
we
I got
had...
to ride Amtrak. That was the best part.
Right. We had our wedding day streamed, and we had a really large number of people tuning in from all around the world.
Yeah.
We even had our own Twitter hashtag.
We did, yes, we did.
Hashtag Bonathan. What a genius idea.
Yeah, like Brangelina and what is it? J-Rod. I don't remember all of them. Neither of those are still going, so I don't think.
Yeah. So it was a lovely day.
It was a lovely wedding. Really nice wedding.
And the hotel we stayed at on our wedding night, it had an iPad in every room.
It did, yeah. And you could room service, and it was a really nice hotel suite. I mean, I would be happy to live there. It was,
I'm sure you would.
Big apartment.
We did get voiceover working on it eventually.
Yeah,
didn't we?
but we couldn't navigate the menus.
Yeah, the menu wasn't very accessible in the end.
And I suggested you leave the voiceover on, but you didn't. So.
No, we don't want to be
It would be fun to freak out the next guest.
Yeah, we don't want to.
Why is my iPad talking?
We don't want to buck the system. Yes, that's right. So at our anniversary, we were thinking about going out, and we actually still can if we want to, but Wellington is in coronavirus level 2 at the moment. So what happened was that we got a lovely visitor. They have this thing called the Trans-Tasman Bubble.
Not anymore.
Yeah, which people were hankering for. And the idea is that New Zealanders and Australians could hop across the Tasman and not have to go through managed isolation and quarantine. So people were happy about that. They felt it was some degree of normality being restored. But last weekend, there was a wee outbreak in Sydney. Somebody came over from there to visit, and it turned out that later he tested positive for the Rona. The good thing is that he had one dose of his vaccination. That may well have saved us because he does have the Delta variant.
Yeah.
Imagine being that person, though, and hearing about all the places you visited on the news. And
oh, yeah, and everyone always laughs. I mean, kudos to him. He did check in places. But he obviously really enjoyed art because he went to a couple art galleries and a big art exhibit up at Te Papa. And I didn't know every cafe he went to. I'd not heard of one of them called the High Water. But he went to the Countdown on Lambton Quay. He went, and you're thinking, why is he going to these places? And he went to the Life Pharmacy on Lambton Quay. So everyone's thinking, was he having symptoms then? And so yeah, you just don't want to be on that 1:00 press conference with all the places that you visited.
It will seem very strange to people listening, say, from the Northern Hemisphere or India or countries like that where they're really battling this and it's been very tough. Whenever we have a single example like this, it becomes a national fixation, and so they publish all the all the locations of interest that the person has been. And if you have been in those places at about that time, you have to self-isolate by law. And it works. I mean, we haven't had community transmission in New Zealand, a single case of the coronavirus for a long time. I think, February was the last time?
Yeah, I think so.
So we're on a good streak.
I have a feeling we're coming to an end, though.
Well,
That's
it is
my
difficult,
gut feeling. Yeah.
especially with the Delta variant. So we're
Yeah.
doing all we can to maintain that streak. And that's why we went into a level 2 lockdown, which is basically more masks, more social distancing.
Yeah, it's not a whole lot different than one, honestly.
A limit on the number of people who can gather together.
Gathering together is the big one.
Yeah.
That would be
And so far, so good. We appear to have dodged the bullet. So we're supposed to go out of level 2 at 11:59 tonight, and the cabinet is meeting this morning. Meanwhile, though, unfortunately, it's got much worse for Sydney, and they are going into a 2-week lockdown. They have gone into it now. So the government here has decided to pop the Trans-Tasman Bubble, and it's paused now for 3 days while they figure out what to do.
So you can't go to Melbourne, right? I mean, Melbourne is in that bubble. So
That's right. I mean, you can go, I think,
I mean,
but you
can
just have
go.
to spend 14 days in managed
Quarantine,
isolation
yeah.
and quarantine.
I have not heard them comment on our government comment on people who are vaccinated, like New Zealanders, who are vaccinated, if they can travel and come back and not have to quarantine. There's been no clarity around that yet.
I think it might be possible, and the reason I say this is because some of our cricketers are coming back home. Now, we have to talk about this. I mean, I know that you don't really dig it too much, but it's been an amazing week for New Zealand sport, for New Zealand cricket in particular. And there are quite a few things I'd like to say about this. The one thing I would say is that, New Zealand is a very small country. We've only got 5 million people. And so what I like about New Zealand sport is that we do play sports where we take on other international teams, the national teams of other countries. So we have been participating in the last 2 years or so in the International Cricket Council's Test Championship. Now, for those who don't know anything about cricket, Test matches are the long form of the game. They can go as long as 5 days, and this causes a lot of Americans especially to scratch their heads in incredulity and say, how can you enjoy a game that goes 5 days and then you might not have a result at the end of it? It's kind of like a game of chess. There's so much strategy. There's so many twists and turns. It is enthralling. It's like getting deep into a novel. So they've had this championship where when you play this form of the game, you get allocated points as you win. And New Zealand managed to become the number 1 test side in the rankings, but that also earned us a place in the first ever International Cricket Council Championship of Test Match Cricket, where we played India. And what really is funny, slightly frustrating, but funny, is that constantly, no matter how well we perform, the cricket Illuminati sort of write off New Zealand all the time. They underestimate us. I had every confidence that we would beat India. I was in little doubt of it. But what was concerning me was the English weather was so bad that 2 of the days were rained out. Luckily, they had allocated a spare day. But we were able to beat India within, well, effectively less than 4 days of actual cricket. And we are now the world champions. And I think, we were robbed due to stupid rules of a World Cup, well, if not a victory, a tie in the one-day form of the game in 2019. It still hurts many of us. It hurts us real bad to win this game, to win this match finally, and be the world cricket champions of Test match cricket. It's incredibly special, and many people are saying it's the greatest thing that has ever happened in New Zealand sport. It was just such a proud moment. Wow. Absolutely fantastic. So, congratulations to India for putting up a really good fight.
Yeah.
They are classy in terms of the way they perform. They're a very good side, good batting, good bowling attack, but we were on top of it. And it was just, well, one of the best days of my life, I have to say.
That's great.
Yes! You slept through it. Because it's
did.
been taking place in England, a lot of us are very sleep deprived.
Yes. Like most of the country is.
Yeah, it was just really cool going into meetings on that Thursday and everybody yawning and butt bonding at the same time over the cricket. Yeah. So it means a lot to a small country like New Zealand to be number 1 on the world stage like that. And there's such a great bunch of guys. There are some cricket teams who do not play the game in the spirit with which you traditionally associate cricket. And so these guys are classy. Really, really good. Anyway, I shall stop now. What else is going on that you would like to tell us
I start my new job tomorrow.
Woo!
So that's exciting. It's kind of strange because I just go into where I work and go to my desk and, same. There's no kind of, what's the word you want? Kind of, you go to the same place you were and then you just do something different. I guess the big thing is I'll have to change my voicemail.
You need some sort of delineator.
Delineating.
Some reset.
Reset. I need a reset. I don't know how you get that. I mean, I've done this before when I worked at Seeing Eye, but I was in a different office and I think we had been off for New Year's. I think had I been on vacation? Probably. It was over the Christmas break. I mean, we didn't shut down. I mean, we shut down for students, but we didn't shut down for staff. But a lot of people took time off, and I think because I think I came back, and a lot of my jobs have started in January. So I don't know why I start new jobs in the winter. It's very strange, but anyway, so there's no real delineation. So I'll have to figure out some way to delineate from Friday to Monday or Thursday.
I know.
What?
A porphyry.
There you go.
There is a tradition in New Zealand from our
I don't think they're
indigenous.
gonna give
See,
me
you're
that.
cross-talking me again.
Sorry.
There is an indigenous cultural tradition here in New Zealand from our Māori people called a porphyry. It's kind of like a welcome, and I think that's what you need. You need to be welcomed in that way into the new role.
Well, okay, if there are any Maori listening, who could get together a group and they could just follow me into work tomorrow and we can stand around my desk and have a porphyry.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's what you want.
Then we have a cup of tea and everyone looks at me like, what the heck are you doing? Why are you doing that for this? So
Yeah, I think it would be good.
That is very nice when they do those, though.
I know that people are on tenterhooks. Tenterhooks! Wanting a washing machine update. So here we are.
There's not really an update.
No.
I mean, it still works. I have to say that it can wash clothes. It just can't use the app still.
Yes, you say that every week.
Yeah.
It doesn't minimize the crisis.
It doesn't minimize it, but it still works. You technically are not piling up loads of laundry, which thank God.
Yeah, so I got a call from Samsung earlier in the week. I was in the middle of a meeting. My day job is crazy busy, and I didn't return the call because they didn't leave a voicemail, so I didn't know why they were calling. Then they called back during the Clubhouse event yesterday, and they did leave a voicemail. And they said, could you please ring us back because we've got something we want you to try. So when I called them back, they said, are you by the washing machine? It was almost like, are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin.
Like you just hang out by the washing machine.
Yeah. I said, I'm not. And if you're going to give me buttons to press, first it would be good to understand what it is you're asking me to do because we have tried resetting the device as a completely new machine. And if that's what you're saying to do, we've already done that. And I said that in the email. But he seemed reluctant to divulge the secret recipe. He's like the Colonel Sanders of washing machines, unless I was by the washing machine. And so in the end, I had to say to him, and I really didn't want to disclose this because it just adds a spanner in the works. But I said, look, what you're going to have to do is email the instructions to me because I'm totally blind. And this is one of the reasons why this issue is so important to us, because we need to be able to control the app from the washing machine. So if you could email me the instructions, if we haven't attempted them before, we will follow them when we have assistants available to do that. And he said, I will do that, but I can't email you until Monday because our email department isn't open on a Saturday.
It's like, what is the email department?
Yeah.
I mean, don't people send their own emails? It's very strange. I just had this picture of that's all people do all day is sit in this little pool of computers and email things. You email them.
I would like to know if there's anybody listening from the email department of Samsung, because you seem like a pretty influential person I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the magic person who sends the emails at Samsung. It's like that old Grace, what's her name? Gracie Field song about the thingamabob. Have you ever heard that?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
But the email department. The email department? Surely they would give it a better name than the email department.
We could play that thingamabob on Small World, actually.
Yeah, you could.
We will do it. How did you enjoy the first Small World?
I enjoyed it. Yeah, I got to hear things I haven't heard in a very long time, like Ladies First. I've not heard that in so long.
Yeah, a number of Americans seem to remember the Ladies First one. So that obviously did get some airplay in the United States. We've had so much lovely reaction to that show. And, of course, Small World's back again, believe it or not. They're letting it on again.
Yeah, today at 4.
Yeah, midnight Eastern time for 6 plays throughout Sunday and every Sunday. And most of the songs and stories we're playing today have been requested by listeners.
That's cool.
So that didn't take long.
No, it didn't.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else to communicate with?
I got my second jab last Sunday.
Oh.
Yep. So I am fully 5G compliant, as they say. So, yeah. So jab number 2. I was kind of tired Monday and Tuesday. Not any serious side effects that some people have. And
your arm was sore.
My arm was really sore. That's what it... That's one thing that the jab does do. It was really sore for like a day, then it just kind of goes away. So, and Monday I was just really sleepy, which someone said can be one of the side effects. And then Monday night it was hard to know whether it was the shot or it's been really cold and wet and disgusting here for a week, and we've had a lot of flooding up parts of the country on last Monday, I guess it was. I mean, the weather was just terrible. And so Monday night I was really chilled, and I had just taken the dog out, so I wasn't sure whether it was because I got chilled or whether it was a corona shot or what. So I got up to put a warmer nightgown on and caused a great crash from the dresser. This candle fell off and broke into like a gazillion pieces.
It was really scary. I was
It was
talking about
very
this
loud.
I was talking about this on the Mosen Explosion the other day, that I had my little hypnosis routine on for going to sleep, and the next thing it was a thump, and I thought, God, I hope you haven't keeled over or something.
It's pretty.
Wow.
It sounded like an elephant crashed through the board.
Yeah.
Which did happen in Thailand, apparently. This elephant crashed into these people's kitchen and started eating some rice.
Nice.
That'd be terrifying. You're in your kitchen, a big elephant comes in.
I haven't had a single corona jab yet.
Not yet.
So I'm
Better.
looking forward to my number coming up.
Which is still very confusing here because some people just walk in and jab, 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 and others get told, nope, not today.
Yeah, well.
Very confusing.
Anyway, we are, of course, looking forward very much to putting the Windows 11 Insider build on your laptop.
I don't think so.
I think that you're going to be the one who sacrifices for the cause.
No. Get your own laptop.
All right, then. Well, I'm sure it'll be a lovely remainder of our anniversary, having a nice meal at home.
We are.
Under level 2.
Yep.
Yeah. Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you for putting up with me.
Yeah, thank you for putting up with me.
All right, then. Goodbye.
Bye.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
Well, hello. I'm calling with a comment about your feature about social services and the child. And my comment is, this has been going on for I don't know how long. I heard about it many years ago, and obviously these things are adjudicated one way or another. But whether it's this or whether it's blind literacy, teaching children to read Braille in public schools, I don't know how many other issues, they just go on, and they never get any public notice, and they never get resolved. They're resolved here and there, but they're never resolved. So my question is, why is it that blind people don't do anything to make pests of themselves and get themselves covered in the media? I think that we should demonstrate and do marches and all the sorts of things that the civil rights movement and the feminist movement and whatever other movements you want to mention starting in the late 50s and early 60s have done to get attention and to start people talking and becoming aware that it's no more acceptable to treat blind people in ways that we are treated than it is to treat other minority groups. I have people say things to me that no one would dream of saying to other minority groups who have public attention. Now, that doesn't mean that other minority groups are necessarily treated better sometimes, but at least it's progress if people understand that they're not supposed to say certain things because they're wrong. At least that's something. So my question is, why are people so quiet? Why are the advocacy organizations so quiet? And so we'll solve this quietly and never do anything to call attention to ourselves as a group and get coverage. And that is my comment. Thank you. And I've been listening to you off and on over a long period of years, and I'm glad to see that you're still out there with thought-provoking commentary and a lot of good information, as you have been for decades. Oh, this is Gene, by the way. Thank you and goodbye.
Well, thank you for calling and also for listening, Gene, and for your very thought-provoking question. I understand the frustration, and I think that we can learn from other disadvantaged groups. When I look at the sea change that there's been for the LGBTQ community, when there was so much opposition to gay marriage only a couple of decades ago, and for most people, it's just a fact that marriage is between men and women, And now, look where we are. Many countries embracing and celebrating gay marriage. It's a wonderful turnaround. That's the closest parallel, I think, that I can find, because I think we need to separate advocacy into two categories. One is legislative, and the other is attitudinal. And I actually think that the blind community has done really well, in Western countries anyway, with legislative advocacy. Blind people in a number of countries that I can think of, like the United States and Australia and New Zealand certainly, were well ahead of other disability groups in advocating for particular provisions, benefits, whether it be Social Security or guide dogs. We've done pretty well with that kind of legislative advocacy over the years. And I think the reason for that is that it's easier to convince a small select group like legislators. You can go in there, you can reason with them, you can prove your case, and then they pass a law to get you out of the way, essentially. It's much harder, though, to change people's attitudes, the attitudes of the general public. And this is why I keep going on about inappropriate use of the word blind, because that stuff is seeping into people's subconscious. When they hear constantly blindness being associated with ignorance and stupidity and all the things that we have been talking about in past weeks on this show, I think you would be very optimistic to suggest that that doesn't get ingrained in people's subconscious, and that when a blind person applies for a job, that sort of usage doesn't have a negative effect. I guess what I'm inferring from your email, Jean, is that you have formed a view that we've all gone a bit soft. And in some ways I agree with you, in the sense that when you look at the militancy, shall we say, of an organisation like the NFB, which based on your accent I'm thinking you'll be familiar with, in, say, the 70s and 80s and even earlier, they were marching a lot, they were protesting, they were kind of your traditional civil rights, let's get out there and create a bit of mayhem organisation. They were doing things on the airlines to protest certain airlines policies. And now, although those sorts of things do happen from time to time, there's a lot more getting into the boardroom, having the conversations, offering consultancy services. And I suppose the way that we should measure whether that strategy is working or not is the deliverables. What has that change of strategy delivered for us? And that could be something about which there's a lot of debate to be had. Undoubtedly, the unemployment rate among blind people is still atrocious, even though we have disability rights legislation and there has been significant progress in terms of technology that allows us to fit into many more workplaces. So why is that? I don't know whether protests would necessarily change that, because we're just dealing with fear of blindness, negative attitudes about blindness. People just can't conceive of how a blind person can get on in the world. They just don't get it. So I think where we're weak may not be so much the rabble-rousing advocacy, although I don't mind seeing a bit more of that myself, but I think it could be a lack of public education. That's not for want of trying either. I remember the very first time I went to an American Blindness Convention, which was actually the NFB's convention in Chicago in 1995. It was held at the Hilton. It was a great convention. And they had this NFB TV channel that was showing internally at that hotel. And they ran these public service announcements on there that they clearly would disseminate for play on radio and TV around the place. And they sought to educate. They talked about, I remember, how people are nice and not nice, geniuses and jerks in all sorts of professions, just like you. So they've been trying to do this public education thing. And I'm just not sure what we do about that, because I still see surveys after all these years that indicate that many people fear going blind more than they do getting cancer or AIDS. What can we do about that? Is there anything we can do about it? But a great discussion point, Jean, and let's hear from others. Do you think we are just too soft? We're not visible enough compared with other disadvantaged groups, such as racial minorities, the LGBTQ community, and others. And then, of course, you will have people who are like the little red hen. You know the story about the little red hen and baking the bread and everything, and then the little red hen wanted to eat the bread that she didn't want to have a part of? There are blind people like that. There are blind people who sponge off the work of the rest of us when we are fighting for these causes, when we are advocating for these causes, and they will sneer and talk about how, oh, you shouldn't be suing people and nothing ever happens to me. But the reason why nothing happens to them and the fact that they're sitting pretty where they are is because of all the hard graft that so many of us have done to make it so. So sometimes the biggest barriers we face to progress come from other blind people who don't appreciate that these legislative protections that we now have didn't just come in out of thin air. They often involved a lot of advocacy, a lot of demonstrating, a lot of very hard work. And that when we are discriminated against, and that discrimination is illegal, we are entitled by law to have that fixed. But you would be amazed at how many blind people resent the very things that got them where they are.
This is Byron in Louisville. On the question of Windows 11, I'm ambivalent, not knowing a whole lot about it. On the question of tech and defending our right to be and discrimination and those kinds of things, I believe you're correct in that organizations are getting too soft. I have a blatant discrimination situation going, and I'm told, well, go to Kentucky Protection and Advocacy or file an EEO complaint that takes 2 years to get before a judge, and then the judge looks up and says, why don't y'all go off and settle it? And if you're lucky, you can get $20,000. Well, when we're dealing with systemic discrimination by a city authority that has been doing it for over 20 years, I believe that's a little bit small.
Thank you, Byron. Here's Dan Teveld who says, hi, Jonathan. Thank you for raising this issue. There has been a good discussion about the problems blind people face seeking employment. I think there are other issues which should be discussed. One issue which needs to be addressed is the language sighted people use against us. Sighted people blame us for not being prepared for work, but don't provide us resources to be independent in the first place. There is a lot of ableist language directed at us. The fact that the American Foundation for the Blind uses the term learned helplessness in their employment articles in Access World to blame us for not trying to be independent is insulting. It's an example of telling us what is wrong with us rather than providing us the resources to be independent in the first place. The fact that the words for the blind are used in the agency's name instead of the blind sends us the message that sighted people know what's best for us. One of the things I like about being a member of the National Federation of the Blind is that blind people are helping other blind people and serving as role models and gaining the independence we need. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Dan. If you have heard the In the Arena series that Glenn Gordon did about my life story, you will know that here in New Zealand I was extensively involved in the reform of the blindness system in this country, where we changed the Foundation for the Blind to the Foundation of the Blind. But you can't just change the name without changing the way that things work. I'm not familiar enough with the way that the American Foundation for the Blind is constituted, how their board gets there, to make any informed comment whatsoever. But in the case of the Foundation for the Blind, as it was called then, here in New Zealand, we changed the way that the board was appointed and made sure that blind people elected all but one member of that board. That was important because for a long time there was this view that parity between the blind and the sighted on the board was the gold standard. And the model that we adopted with this governance reform was saying it's not so much whether you're blind or not when you're on the board that's important, it's who you're accountable to. So that if blind people don't think you're doing a good job in terms of looking after the resources raised in our names, we can replace you with somebody else. So that was quite a significant thing. And since then I have seen other agencies around the world emulate this example. And obviously I'm flattered by that, but I'm not sure that some of them have followed through with the reform that's necessary to truly earn the name of being an of the blind organization. Because typically of the blind organizations have been advocacy focused rather than service provision focused. So if you're going to change that and become an of the blind organization, you are going to have to make damn sure as an organization that you're constituted in such a way that blind people genuinely do control it. Robert Kinget writes, "Hi Jonathan, thank you for covering this topic, blindness advocacy. It's something I've been thinking about, especially as I learn more about the social model of disability. Our technical advocacy is very strong. What I continuously see, however, are two factors in the blind and visually impaired community that, I feel, are holding us back in terms of social perceptions. Our social advocacy is almost non-existent. Even today, I still have people ask me how I can use a computer. I've been examining the deaf community and their advocacy efforts. The deaf community seems to advocate on a more topical level than a technology level. For instance, there was a TV show that is now audio described called Switched at Birth. It had quite a bit of deaf and hard of hearing actors present social issues wrapped up in an entertaining storyline. A hearing and deaf girl was switched at birth. When the two families met, it educated viewers as well as the characters stringently about deaf culture. We don't celebrate blind culture at all, it seems. We're too busy trying to forget and erase our blindness rather than having someone proudly be blind or visually impaired in popular media. I think we just need to start tackling our social advocacy more than our technical advocacy. I also think we need to ditch this toxic individualized mentality that if we're not flying planes or if we're not the best traveller, that we're not worthy of being included in the community, or that our accessibility needs need to be dismissed so we can impress a sighted person instead of having access needs met. We would rather pour billions into medical treatments rather than improve perceptions about our capabilities, and I'll never understand it. Thanks, Robert. The question of the way that blind people are portrayed in the media is a thorny one and an interesting one. I saw a show, sadly only a couple of episodes of it though, a few years ago called Growing Up Fisher. Does anybody remember this? I think there was one series of it and then it was never to be seen again, and I don't know if you can still watch it anywhere. I'd quite like to because, as I say, I only got around to a couple of episodes before it disappeared on whatever I was watching it on. But it seemed pretty good to me, the episodes I watched. It was about a blind dad. I believe he was a lawyer from memory. You know, he was quite a capable blind person, and the episodes I watched seemed to be all right. That was one of the better ones. Of course, the portrayals that really make me cringe are the ones where you see the blind person feeling people's faces and crazy soup like that. Oh, God. But, yeah, the portrayal of disabled people in the media is a really important topic. And I know for a while the NFB had a thing going, a little hashtag on Twitter saying, let us play us. And they were saying that if you're going to feature a blind person or in fact a disabled person in the media, then have a person with that impairment play the role. Eden's got a problem with her phone, and we'll hear about it now. She says, I'm running an iPhone SE 2020. I have public beta 14.7, although I can say fairly certainly this was not update related. It just seems that all of a sudden when I open a link on my phone, instead of opening Safari, it just sends me to my status bar. You know, where I can see all my wireless and cellular data connections. I changed web browsers and it worked for a time, but then it stopped working too. What is going on? Would you have any idea? I turned off screen recognition. It won't read with speech or braille, with a lowercase b. This is absolute insanity. I can't think of anything that could cause this, but I'm on the verge of reinitializing my old iPhone 8, or worse, I suppose, a factory reset. I'm going to download another browser, but worried the same thing will just happen. Thanks, Eden. When you download browsers on your iPhone, you're not making that much of a difference, actually, because they're all required to use the same browser engine. So there'll be some user interface differences and some feature differences. But if the problem's deep in the browser engine somewhere, then you may not get any relief. If you've changed your default browser option to whatever you want to try, so set your default browser to Chrome or Edge or whatever, and you're still having this problem, and it does sound like that's what you've done, the next thing I would try, if you've not done so already, is to warm reset the phone, not just shutting it down and turning it on again, but there's a process of warm resetting the phone. To do this, you've got to do the magic Apple dance. So what you do, and you've got to do this in reasonably quick succession, is press volume up, volume down, and then hold down the side button for quite some time until the phone powers off and starts to recycle. So volume up, volume down, hold that button on the side until it's rebooting, and that does put it through a more aggressive form of restart and resets a few things. Sometimes this clears mysterious problems like this up. If that doesn't work, then you may need to go and start having a look at some of the settings options. And yes, I guess as a last resort, you could try resetting the phone. If you haven't had a chat to Apple Tech support, it might be worth doing that. They may be able to remote into the phone, do some diagnostics, which we mere mortals are not able to do, and they could resolve it for you. If you do get it resolved, let us know what you finally did to fix it. Jason Stradone writes, "Hello, Jonathan. Thanks again for all of the good content. I would like to see if you or any listeners have any suggestions on how to send audio from my TiVo that is connected to my TV to my Sonos system. This is a small TV, and I don't want to spend the money for a soundbar. I just want to be able to send the TiVo audio to my Sonos system. I have 3 different Sonos SL1s and would like to AirPlay the TV audio over the speakers. I didn't know if I could purchase an AirPlay 2 adapter to connect to the TiVo so I could select that device and then send that audio over the Sonos speakers. I know Sonos has a few products that might help with that, but I didn't know if another option exists. Thanks for any help you can give." And it says here that Jason is JAWS Certified 2020. Hope you're going to get your 2021 JAWS certification, Jason. It's good to hear from you. And you've posed an interesting question, because Belkin recently released an adapter. And when I thought about this, I thought this could be what you're after. It's called the Soundform Connect. But it goes the other way. So with the Soundform Connect, you're able to connect this wee gadget to, say, the line out of a device like your stereo system, and then you'll be able to send, say, from your iPhone to that. So it's designed for sending to something, but what you're asking about is sending from your TiVo to existing AirPlay devices, and I cannot find a gadget that does that. That's not to say that one doesn't exist, but if it does, it's a lot more obscure. I have a gadget from 12 South called the AirFly, which does this for Bluetooth, but I haven't been able to find an equivalence for AirPlay. So your best bet could possibly be to just bite the bullet, as they say, and do something within the Sonos ecosystem. One thing you could do is buy the Sonos port. It's an excellent device, and then you would have no problem at all getting your TiVo onto your Sonos speakers that way. You'd also get line out, which does have some advantage sometimes. So the Sonos port is quite pricey, but it's worth it. It's good quality. It just does what you want it to do. Another option is to upgrade your speakers. You could go with a Sonos 5, which has a line-in, and then you could run an analog line-in cable from one of the Sonos 5s to your TiVo, and that would make the TiVo part of your Sonos system as well, and that works very well. We've got a couple of Sonos 5s in the studio. We have another Sonos 5 upstairs, and the line-ins are quite handy because you can also use this to connect any number of things. Some people use them to connect Victor Reader streams, more commonly analog turntables. It has all sorts of cool uses. But if anybody knows of an AirPlay transmitter, that's what we're after here, an AirPlay transmitter, so that Jason can connect this to his TiVo and essentially broadcast that as an AirPlay signal that can then be sent to his existing AirPlay speakers, please let us know. Great question. This email is from Pam Francis, who writes, "Hello, Jonathan. When my daughter was a teenager, she gave me one of the highest compliments I think I could have ever had. As a blind parent, at the time single, she said to me she did not see me as blind, she saw me as her provider. Both of my children are adults with families of their own. Neither of them see me as anything less than what they are, except for my lack of vision. I feel as if I'm very fortunate. You are indeed. Thank you, Pam, for sharing that. Being a parent is certainly the most wonderful thing that has happened in my life. And there have been moments where my kids have said something that has made me really proud. There was a moment in one of my kids' social studies class where the teacher put forth the absurd idea that you should have to be able to see to vote, and that if you couldn't see to mark your own ballot paper, then you shouldn't be allowed to vote. And the child concerned was outraged and got up and spoke up and said, "My dad is blind and he's one of the most politically astute people that I know, and how dare you," basically. So I was very, very proud. And it is great when you realize that the kids have internalized those things and have become little disability rights advocates, even if they're not disabled themselves. And you do hear a lot of psychobabble nonsense from so-called professionals in the blindness space about some of this stuff. I remember talking to somebody. It was very scary because this person was supposedly a specialist in child and family issues when it came to blindness. And he told me that most children of blind parents resent the fact that the children are blind. Now, as you can appreciate, I called utter nonsense on this. I think any of us who've got through the trauma, the challenge of parenting teenagers, know that there are times when you feel like, what's happened to my wonderful child? They've metamorphosized into these crazy, unreasonable, hormonal people. But that's part of parenting. It doesn't matter whether you're a blind parent or not. You are most likely going to experience some difficulties with at least some of your kids, if you have more than one, in their teenage years. They're stretching the boundaries. A lot's changing for them. They're discovering life. And whether you're blind or whether you're not, there's going to be some resentment there. But it really is frustrating when you get these people who think that they are authorities on blindness. They are, in fact, sighted people with second-hand knowledge, and they come out with these very dangerous assertions that can't be substantiated. So stories like this are very important to tell, so thank you for telling it, Pam.
Mushroom FM.
Back to the topic of TP-Link, who seemingly don't give a flying flamingo about accessibility, if I may coin a phrase from John Burko. And Peter's in touch again. He says, "Hi, Jonathan. Firstly, a couple of thank yous. While I am not hearing impaired, I do tend to listen to you via the podcast, usually when I have nothing to take notes. Your chapter markers are a big help." But Marcus sent in a contribution regarding my message on the TP-Link Deco app. Thanks to the transcript, I was quickly able to locate his instructions and copy them to my PC so I could check them. I'd love to report success. However, screen recognition was already off. I ran the Deco app and was faced with a blank screen. I have checked my iOS version, 14.6, and decided to switch off VoiceOver and run using Siri, following which I would switch on VoiceOver. This actually worked first time, but as soon as I turned on screen recognition, the app crashed. Ever since this, despite turning off VO and restarting the app, I cannot get anything but a blank screen. To be fair, on TP-Link, this was a problem I had with HW Buddy, although it showed an error at the top of the page if you used Explore by Touch. However, I tried this app again and it worked fine. Has anyone else had any issues with other apps not loading, and could this be an OS problem rather than the dreaded TP-Link? My thanks, therefore, must go to you for providing the transcript, which is really useful for so many reasons, and also to Marcus for his interest and suggestion. I am going to forward Marcus's comments and my most recent findings to TP-Link because I enjoy banging my head against a brick wall. Have a great day. Well, you have a great day as well, Pete, and as I often like to say, advocacy is often about feeling like your head is being banged against a brick wall, but every so often the wall moves a little bit. It would be great if you could find a way to escalate this and bring it to the attention of someone who cares. In our extensive breaking news coverage of our washing machine sagas, we talked about Easter eggs with Fisher & Paykel washing machines. This was on the Bonnie Bulletin, and we talked about how some washing machines will play the New Zealand national anthem. And it actually made me wonder, have you found things in appliances or software that are totally unexpected? It's a fun topic. For example, I remember with the original Kurzweil reading machine, and that really is dating me, big washing machine-like device that you have to put in a special room with an electrostatic mat so it didn't get damaged, and when you switched it on, it sounded like it was taking off like an airplane. But they had a little keypad with that machine, and it had a button called the special command button, and you would push the special command button followed by a 2-digit code, and this would do different things. And this particular special command that I want to talk about wasn't documented, but one day, being the little geek that I was even then, I decided, let's go through all of these special commands from 00 to 99 and see if there were any that were not documented, because I wanted to know everything about this amazing Kurzweil reading machine. And I'm pretty sure it was when I got to special command 21. I'm pretty sure it was 21. It loaded the classic Colossal Cave adventure game, and I was absolutely ecstatic. So, when people thought that I was in there diligently reading print books, I was enthralled by the original Colossal Cave adventure. Don't tell anyone, will you? I don't want to be put on detention, I tell you. Terry McElroy is writing in on this. Not the Kurzweil, but Easter eggs. She says, "Hi, Jonathan. Just to let you know, the Easter egg won't work on Fisher & Paykel machines manufactured from 2013 onwards, when manufacturing was transferred to China. For those with older machines still capable of this, the Easter egg can be made to play the national anthem from New Zealand or Australia or America." Well, she says, instructions can be Googled on how to do this. I think it only works with top loader machines. Marvellous. Thank you, Terry. And if anybody else has found little things that your appliances or even software do that aren't documented, in other words, Easter eggs, what a fun topic. David is writing in and says, "Do you know anyone with an iPhone 10? I got mine in November of 2017 that is having trouble with the battery life. I'm running version 14.6 of iOS, and I'm having some serious degradation of battery life, especially while running Apple Podcasts. Any suggestions?" Well, first I would suggest don't run Apple Podcasts. It's a really mediocre podcast app. But the second thing I would say is that given the phone is almost 4 years old, I would think that's about right to look at for a battery replacement, particularly since in 2017, I don't think Apple had introduced all the optimization features yet to try and keep the battery in trim. This is the feature where you might see this, where if it's got to understand your usual use patterns, it will sit at 80% for ages and then optimize your battery. So, for example, if I set my 5 a.m. alarm, which is when I usually get up, it will sit at 80% until about 3:30. Even if I put my phone on charge, say at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and then it will give it the last 20% of juice, and that's designed to prolong the battery life. But it is quite recent that all those changes were implemented, and so I would say that you should head along to your friendly neighborhood Apple store and get the battery replaced.
Hello, Jonathan. This is Morris Mons. Two things. One, in an earlier podcast, someone had said that they weren't able to use Amadeus Pro on the Mac. I use Amadeus Pro quite a bit on the Mac. It's not a problem. I think Amadeus Pro behaves in the manner of whichever rendition of macOS you're running. The other thing is I have some question about podcasting, ironically enough. I am getting ready to publish my life as a deaf-blind person. So the podcast, I think, is about 2/3 done in terms of interviews and the initial recording. But where and how do I publish these things? That's my big question. Because there's no point in publishing something if no one is going to listen to it. Also, along with this, I'm going to have a transcript because my life as a deafblind person talks about deafblindness and living life. Hence, there will be some people on the very board that I'm on who can't even hear this podcast. So, there's going to be a written version of this available at roughly around the same time as the audio version is. Any ideas on where and how to publish that?
Thank you for getting in touch, Morris. I'm sure that your podcast will be interesting as you chronicle your life as a deafblind person. If you go back into the Mosen at Large archives, last year I did a review of some of the popular podcast hosts. Now that was done at a time when we weren't offering transcriptions of the show, so it may be difficult for you to access. The short version is that there are a lot of good options out there. My personal favorite is one called Pinecast. I like this because the developer is willing to engage on accessibility issues, the price is reasonable, it has excellent features, and they do have a limited free option available to you, so Pinecast would be worth considering. There is also Anchor.fm, and that is completely free. I think Pinecast might be easier though. If you have already recorded something in Amadeus, then all you would need to do is save it in Amadeus in MP3 or M4A format and then upload it using Pinecast. However, when you start your podcast, you will need to make sure that it is listed in Apple Podcasts and any other podcast services that you choose. But Apple Podcasts is still the most important one, because it's the Apple Podcast directory that a lot of other podcast apps leverage in order to find podcasts. So if you're not in Apple Podcasts, you really may as well not have a podcast. This is one area where, although there are some caveats with it, Anchor FM can be very attractive because it does all of the listing in the podcast directories for you when you sign up and when you're ready to go. As far as transcripts are concerned, and I know this will be really important for some of your audience, I looked long and hard at a range of automated options, which are certainly very cost-effective, but none of them were very good at all. None of them catered to the wide variety of recording environments and accents and speaking speeds that are common with a contribution-based podcast like this one. So in the end, we resorted to humans, and we use a service called GoTranscript.com. GoTranscript is all one word. They are cheaper, even at their base price, than other human podcast services that I have seen, and the more you use it, the cheaper it gets, which, given how much business I am feeding them, really does help me out a lot and make the grants that we've received for transcribing this podcast last a little longer. Now, once you've published your podcast and it's available in directories, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to flock to it. You are going to have to spread the word. You're going to have to find ways to market your podcast, let people know that it's there. I imagine that you have some pretty robust, extensive networks in the deafblind community, so you would want to reach out to those networks. You would want to post information about your podcast on relevant social media groups if you have social media access, certainly on deaf-blindness-related email lists, anywhere that you know that your potential target audience is lurking. That's where you should be to make sure that your podcast has that leverage. Good luck. Let us know how you get on. Andy Rebsher writes, "Hi Jonathan, as you were discussing medical consent signatures and capture within the same podcast, I had a few thoughts. One of my medical providers uses a nicely constructed and very accessible site for their appointment confirmation and consent forms. It prompts you if you neglect to fill in something and clearly notifies you when the form has been submitted. When you go to the appointment, you can breeze into the office without being required to fill out and sign any forms. I also had an awkward time with signatures in those situations when they were on paper. Once the electronic signature pads came into use, it became even more difficult. As for capture, I heard you mention that the audio version is quite impossible with a hearing impairment. As yet, I still have really good hearing, but have never succeeded in getting one of those audio captures right. I'm talking 100% failure rate. As you have mentioned, Google's approach is great. I hope something similar becomes the norm. Thanks to you and all your listeners for a show worth looking forward to each week. Well, thank you, Andy, for your contribution, because it's contributions like yours that make it worth looking forward to every week. And I look forward to yours for next week. If you'd like to be in touch, jonathan@mushroomfm.com is the email address, 86460-MOSEN is the phone number, and I hope very much that we will see you for Small World over at Mushroomscape, the kids program for the whole family. Really looking forward to doing that every week now. But right now, it is time to wrap it up for Mosen at Large and say thank you so much for your company. You can, of course, join me throughout the week on Mushroom FM for the Mosen Explosion, a fun music-based show that is on at 2 a.m. and p.m. Eastern Time during the week. Stand by. Steve Cartway is next.